Yeah, I've seen people say like it weirds them out, like the whole like the healing hands and stuff. I don't know. Some people are weirded out by it.
No, I just think it's about, like I said, it's about a masseuse. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
depending on how dirty of a mind you have, you can think it's about something else. But
yeah. It's not Annalie the hooker. Like, hey everyone, my name is Jake, and welcome to the 45th episode of Good Timin. As always on this podcast, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite bands, the Beach Boys. And today, we're going to be resuming our late 60s album deep dive series and covering the group's 14th studio album, Friends, from 1968. So, as always with our album discussion episodes, we're first going to go over some of the general history behind the record and talk about where the Beach Boys were at the time. And then we will discuss each of the tracks one by one and share our own thoughts and opinions on them. And then at the end of the episode, we'll also discuss some of the outtakes and other recordings that the band made around the time. And then to wrap up, we'll briefly talk about the commercial and critical reception that Friends received. So, joining me tonight, I have my good friends Riley, Matt, and Nate, as well as our special guest, David Beard. David is the editor of Endless Summer Quarterly, the Beach Boys publication of record, and has been providing historical coverage on the activities of the Beach Boys for over 30 years. David is the only journalist in the history of the Beach Boys that has received written and video recorded testimonials from Brian Wilson, Mike Love, Al Jardine, and Bruce Johnston. And through Endless Summer Quarterly, he offers fans of the Beach Boys exclusive interviews, previously unpublished and rare images, video, CD, and DVD reviews, and a lot more. So, along with his many production and design credits over the years, David has also contributed and assisted with multiple Beach Boys documentaries, including the recent Disney Plus documentary. He's provided liner notes to several CD collections, including the Sony Legacy reissue of Dennis Wilson's Pacific Ocean Blue, and he wrote and designed the Beach Boys official tour programs in 2015 and 2016. And then lastly, David also has his own Beach Boys podcast, Good Vibrations, a Beach Boys music program, which is available on iTunes, Amazon Books, and Spotify. So, David, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to talking all things Friends with you. So, before we dive into some of the history and background behind the Friends album, do you guys have any general thoughts or feelings about the record that you wanted to share?
I'll go first. Personally, I really enjoy Friends. It's in my top five Beach Boys records. I think that this is a really nice, and I hate to use this term because we use it a lot, but it's a very nice vibey record. It's got a real chill kind of thing going on. I like that kind of you start to see, I know Dennis kind of come in as a songwriter, and I know that, Brian helped with Little Bird, but I still think it's a great song. You're kind of starting to see more of that like meditation-y stuff coming into the lyrics, which it works on some songs. It does not work on others for me. Kind of like some of the bossa nova-y stuff coming in. You got some of the cool ambient stuff. I love the ambient stuff. Yeah, I just really, really like this record, and I just got it on vinyl not too long ago, so that's
Lucky
really cool.
motherfucker.
eBay. I bought it on eBay because I'm never
Oh,
gonna
that's
find
kind of
it in my neck
cheating,
of the woods.
man. That's
Uh,
cheating.
Whatever. I don't care. My come to freaking Orlando. You're not gonna find crap. So yeah.
Um, yeah, this was actually kind of a slow burn for me. It took a while for this to be like one of the records I really like. I think it's because, to its credit, there's not really that one huge single that kind of like this doesn't have a Darlin' or a Wild Honey in terms of like big single, but as a whole, it's just a complete experience. And I remember it just happened, just clicked one day, I think either last year or the year before in January, just walking outside in the snow and I had it on. It's like, and it just completely clicked for me. And yeah, I hate using this term, but I think if there is a Beach Boys album to have this term, it is vibey. There's no other album like it. It's very unique amongst their catalog. I kind of see it as like Pet Sounds' younger brother. We're not talking about Smile. That's been talked to death. I think Friends is the younger brother just to Pet Sounds. And yeah, it's kind of its own genre. There's not really any one word I can use to describe it. It's pop, but like I can't describe it. It's an experience.
I think it's absolutely one of their most cohesive works. And I think it really laid the foundation for what was to come in the quote unquote brother years. I think Smiley Smile and Wild Honey were kind of like far out experiments, but this one was actually kind of more so the boys buckling down and figuring out what their identity was in this sort of later stage of their career, relatively. I heard some quotes during the time about how they didn't really feel the need to get into heavy music or really distorted guitar oriented stuff, and they were just happy kind of marching to their own drum. And to sum up all of my thoughts, which I could go on and on about this album, but this is the album I go to when I'm feeling stressed or unwell or sad. And this album for me is like an elixir. It always puts a smile on my face. It always reminds me to take a deep breath. And so for that reason, the album is just priceless to me.
Well, I love what everyone has said so far. I think all of these things are applicable. I think that's why first of all, music is such a subjective thing.
Mhm.
But it's interesting to me, regardless of what our favorite Beach Boys song or album might be. I think this album, I love the word cohesive because it's uniquely cohesive. It's really pure. There's a pureness about it that isn't on any other record. So I love what everybody's already touched on, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but without taking up any more time, I think it's a really one statement. I think it's a single statement.
Yeah, so for me, Friends is an album that I personally really enjoy. I'm kind of with Riley on this one. It did take a little bit of time to grow on me compared to some of their other albums like Wild Honey and Sunflower. And there are still a few tracks on the record that I'm not like too crazy about. But that said, I do think that it's a pretty consistent and cohesive album, like you guys said. I really love the chill and laid back sound that most of the album has, as well as some of the cool instrumental arrangements from Brian on songs like Be Here in the Morning and Busy Doing Nothing. I also really like that the other guys began to contribute a little more with songwriting on this album. I know Brian was still doing most of the heavy lifting at this point, but it is really cool to see some of the other guys really coming into their own here. So, yeah, it's an album that I really like. I probably wouldn't rank it quite as highly as some of their other mid 60s and early 70s albums, but I still think it's a great record, and I definitely consider it to be one of my top 10 favorite albums from the band. So I'm really excited to talk about it with you guys tonight. So, all right, so now to get into some of the history behind Friends, I'm going to hand things over to Riley and David. So Riley, to start us off, do you want to talk a little bit about where the band was at around the time and how the album came together?
Yeah, sure. So, while Wild Tony charted a bit higher than Smiley Smile, it's still the boys weren't really hitting the commercial crowd. They weren't, like we said earlier, they weren't going into the guitar heavy music. Like right now, at this point in time, Jimi Hendrix was huge, Cream was huge, Eric Clapton, even the Beatles were getting a bit heavy, and things weren't looking so great for the boys. But as they do, they stuck to their guns and they stuck to themselves. And Brian Wilson produced Friends. A little bit of the background for it. Dennis, Al, and Mike were actually the ones that kind of got into the Maharishi in that crowd. I think they met him after a concert in Paris, and he invited them to come back to meet him. But it was actually Mike that really got into it. Mike actually went on a trip to India. He actually famously went there with his best friend George Harrison, and the other Beatles. And you see a lot of that influence on there. Al also got quite a bit into it, not as much as Mike. And you hear that in a lot of the music and a lot of the lyrics. And in terms of the actual album itself, Al Jardine played quite a big part in this one. He helped co-write a bunch of the songs. Dennis has been getting into songwriting. You see him contribute a little bit with Little Bird, even though it's kind of also a big Brian song too. But still, Dennis was coming into his own. And yeah, this was a big Brian Wilson production. He says this is one of his favorites of all time, and it's a very Brian album. It's a great look into where he was in '68. He was still going on his own path with the pop music rather than the heavy stuff. I'm sure David has a lot of the smaller details.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize with Friends that Brian actually was practicing transcendental meditation ahead of the group. He and Marilyn had learned in Los Angeles from Helen Lutz. And so when they were playing the UNICEF concert in mid-December, December 17th, 67, what drew them is they had this unique experience of George Harrison and John Lennon sitting with Maharishi in the front row down in front of them. And it turned out Mike ended up going off, like after the show, they all met him and everything, but all the other Beach Boys took off to London except for Dennis. And Mike went out to a party with Marlon Brando and was partying all night. Dennis uniquely stayed back. And this was a unique time in their lives collectively, and you guys all kind of touched on that. One of the things was they had met Steve Kalinich by this point, and he had the demo Leaves of Grass. And Steve did not practice transcendental meditation, but he did have a stillness, what he calls a stillness practice, which included meditating, but a different form of meditation. And they were drawn to that. All the guys were. And so you see that in Little Bird and Be Still with the songs on the album with Dennis and Steve. But Steve, they were attracted to that element of Steve. Stevie told me this when we did the Friends Spring 2018 edition of VSQ. And I thought that was fascinating that Brian and Marilyn were already aware of TM, had already gotten into TM. But then Brian being Brian, I'm not getting off track, I promise. Brian and Marilyn got home and they told one another their mantra, and it turned out to be the same one. You're not supposed to share it. So they had a laugh about that. And then Brian would meditate, but then he didn't take it. He didn't really get into the regimen of it, like, as you guys point out, as Riley pointed out, like Mike did. But all the guys, and Bruce would get it later, he maintains that he learned TM, but nobody knows when that was or where that was. So Dennis is the one who calls the guys in London the following day and says, I've met Maharishi, we've talked, he wants to give us all our mantras. Can you come back? And that's what happened. They all got back on a plane, flew from London back to Paris. Maharishi gives them their mantras, explains how to do it, because it's a 4-day course when you get your mantra. I know this because I'll get into that in a little bit. And so what happens is they get the mantra from Maharishi, but they don't do the 4 days. They when they go back to Los Angeles, they complete the course with Helen Lutz. The same person, the same woman, she and her husband, I can't recall his name off the top of my head, but they're a married couple they were both TM teachers. And we're not going to talk about Carl and the Passions, but I'm just going to do a quick aside and say that both Mike and Al would go on to be TM teachers in early '72, learning from Maharishi. And that really robustly showed up in the song All This Is That in a beautiful, unique way. But just focusing on Friends and that timeline, that is so important for people to understand from the listening standpoint what was going on in their lives as they went in from December going into January. Because I'm sure you guys have all seen the sports photos where they went out to park and played sports. I've got all those original slides.
Oh, yeah.
That's January of '68. Now when I look at all those pictures where they're playing softball and football, that to me almost is kind of like the initiation, like the visual component that is the song Friends. I mean, because that's what they're doing. They're going out and hanging out and being buddies with one, right? They're just spending time together. And that to me is kind of the beginning of what happens. And they were all invited to go to Rishikesh, India. Mike is the one who talked to Maharishi on the phone. They were all invited. Mike invited the whole group to come. And they declined. And Mike went on by himself. And no one knew that the Beatles were there. That was not communicated to Mike. So we would like you to come. Can you come? I know you're teasing about them and George being best buddies or whatever.
Pisces brothers, bro. They're Pisces brothers.
That's very good. But yeah, so it's a unique timeline. I think that really sets the stage foundationally to understand the music that was born that would become the Friends album, is to understand that Brian too was practicing, maybe not in the same way that the other guys were, or Bruce, again, because that's just kind of an unknown component. But they all took it quite seriously, and Dennis, uniquely, was spearheading that.
You're just crazy. Dennis was
What
the
a
one
time.
who got him into the surfing scene, and now he's gotten them into the freaking Maharishi. Mike Love owes a
That's
lot
true.
to Dennis, man.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple other things I wanted to add to kind of piggyback off of some of the stuff that David said. So as he mentioned, Mike was with the Maharishi. So because of that, while they were recording the album, Mike wasn't there with the band at Brian's studio for quite a bit of
For all of February and a part of March. That's right.
So for that reason, I believe Mike only appears on 3 or 4 songs. Like I know he's on Healer and Wake the World and Meant for You, but really a lot of the material on here, Mike didn't really have a whole lot of involvement with because he was with the Maharishi, which is an interesting thing because normally, when you think of the Beach Boys, you think of a lot of times Mike's lead vocals, and he's really that prominent on this album. So that's another thing I wanted to add. So shortly after the band finished recording the album, in May, they scheduled a tour with the Maharishi. I believe that this was Mike's kind of idea. It was a way to kind of, introduce the younger crowd to the Maharishi and kind of get them into the transcendental meditation scene and everything that the band was kind of practicing around this time. If you're a fan of the band, you probably know that this tour was a disaster. They scheduled, I believe, 30 dates or something like that, and they ended up only performing 5 of them because the ticket sales were so atrocious. They ended up shortening the tour and just canceling all the dates. I know Carl, I believe, said that was due to kind of like there was a lot of disruption around the time because of the MLK assassination. It was just kind of a very scary time. I know a lot of the dates were scheduled in the Southeast. And just people weren't really showing up. People weren't really into the idea of like the Maharishi lecturing them at this Beach Boys concert. It was just kind of a very weird pairing. I know Mike has said that, he doesn't regret the decision to do that. I know he said that, it's one of those things where like we were trying to, make people happy and try something new, and it just didn't work out. But yeah, definitely that was a bit of a rough patch for them for sure. Another notable thing was that the song Do It Again was released as a single in July, around the time that the album actually came out. It reached the US top 20, so it was a success for them. And I believe it was actually tagged on to the album. I forgot which country it was, but David, wasn't
Japan, I think.
wasn't it tacked on at the end of the album or at the beginning of the album along with the original tracks? Do It Again.
I'm not aware of that. I am aware of Good Vibrations replacing Diamond Head in Australia.
Oh, what the hell? That's weird.
Yeah, Diamond Head was not on the Australian version of Friends. Good Vibrations was.
It's like one of the best songs.
It is one of the best. It is a great song. Yeah.
I would definitely like to throw out there that I think probably more than any of their other albums, this one really embraces Brian's love of jazz music, and not only jazz music, but different sounds from around the world, whether it be Hawaiian influences or Latin influences. But during my listening back to it today, I've been listening to a lot of the Elvis soundtracks recently, and Friends to me actually sounds quite a bit similar to Elvis's Blue Hawaii or Paradise Hawaiian style. Very similar Hawaiian slide guitars and ukuleles and vibraphones going on both those Elvis soundtracks and Friends. So also a lot of Burt Bacharach influence happening at this time. So I kind of think of this as their Bacharach album.
And Carlos Jobim.
You're right, yeah.
A lot of, if you really listen, there's a great live album with Sinatra and Jobim from '68. And if you listen to this album, it's just the Bacharach Jobim and jazz influence. Nate, you just hit it on the head. I mean, that's exactly. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself or when we'll cover it, but Brian was not concerned. This is a spiritual album for the group. They weren't writing these songs from the perspective of what is going to be a hit single.
Mm-hmm.
Capitol Records was thinking that way. The Beach Boys were not thinking that way. They were legitimately just creating something that meant something special to them.
One other quote that I just wanted to briefly share. This was from Al. I believe this was from the Beach Boys book that recently came out. And this quote, I feel like kind of reflects the very chill atmosphere of the time, like with the band recording this album. Al said, "For the Friends album, we showed up to the studio every day, and if Brian showed up, we were writing music. He, of course, was always there because he lived there. We just parked ourselves in the living room and waited for someone to show up, and that's how Brian and I wrote Wake the World and the other songs on Friends together. It was nice to relax and not feel pressure because the studio time was running. We had a great deal of latitude with the time because we were also the musicians, so we didn't have to order session players. It was like the Beatles who could just show up in a studio and play." So I think that kind of shows like the very chill atmosphere that while the band was making this album, the fact that, they kind of just hung out at Brian's place, and, when a song came to them, they'd work together to work it out. And that's really a lot of the songs in this album were kind of, collaborative efforts where Brian would write with Al and Carl and Dennis would contribute too. So I think it's pretty cool that this was kind of like their first like real collaborative album in a way. So,
and it's Smiley Smile was kind of, I love Smiley Smile. I love each album for what it's different reasons.
Yeah.
Smiley Smile, Wild Honey, R&B, Smiley Smile because it's just so odd, wonderfully odd. but you know, Smiley Smile, they were working with pieces, right? He had a lot of the Smile remnants that he was working around and using that Baldwin organ to kind of direct Smiley Smile. Then Wild Honey, they just decided again, what's kind of an easy way? We want to get an album to Capitol. What's kind of an easy way to do that? How do we deliver? Kind of going back a couple years to Party, right? Same type of basic idea. How do we get something done to turn it in? And so they just went with kind of a live jam unplugged album, which worked great. And if anybody, you know, for anyone watching, I highly recommend the Sunshine Tomorrow collection, because that's where you really get to hear Wild Honey in stereo. And there's a lot more vibrancy to that record, listening to it that way. But then, you know, with Friends, this is where Brian is kind of wanting to produce again, right? It's kind of where he is kind of coming with his full heart. You know, Riley, I think you likened it a little bit to Pet Sounds, where it's kind of there's this, and where I find the connection with Pet Sounds is it's Brian's full heart on display again.
Yeah.
Where it's not so much a Beach Boys, you know, even though Al's so much involved in the writing process, I really feel like this is Brian this is really the last time for maybe until Love You, where we really get to see Brian and his heart on full display with the intention of production, right? With Wild Honey, it was kind of a loose, let's get it done. Smiley Smile was, I'm just going to hunker down at the Baldwin organ and see what I come up with. But with Friends, he again, there was spiritual, this is a good phrase, I think, spiritual intention. And in that intention, the desire to really produce again.
Yeah, I think it really, like you said, the songs come across as very authentic. Brian kind of has like those slice of life lyrics on songs like "Busy Doing Nothing," and then also, you kind of alluded to this with the production. You also have more session musicians on this album than on the previous two, I believe, as well, which you really hear that in some of the songs. So, two final things I just wanted to mention really briefly. These are both from Bruce. A quote from Bruce about kind of how the album didn't really fit in with the times. Bruce said, "Friends came out just after Hendrix and Cream. The whole country had discovered drugs, discovered words, discovered Marshall amplifiers, and here comes this feather floating through a wall of noise," which is a funny description of the album, but it kind of makes sense, when you listen to a lot of the other.
He does have a way with words.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I thought was kind of funny from Bruce was that he said that the Friends cover, like the album cover, ultimately ranked second to Pet Sounds for being the worst in the history of music. So I was wondering, do you guys have any opinions on the Friends album cover? Personally, I feel like it actually fits the music pretty well, but I can see why like people like record buyers at the time would be like, what the hell is this? So
I mean, I think it's fine. They had some bad covers over the years. This one is fine, but
man, why are you hating on 15 Big Ones? I love that.
That was later. I'm just trying to think of like what was out in the stores around that time. So things like Magical Mystery Tour, Satanic Majesty's Request, Beggar's Banquet, was that out yet?
The Doors' first album?
The Doors' first album. Now let me say this about the Doors.
Gears was out. I know Wheels of Fire was out. I think
Zombies, Odyssey, and Oracle, and
that
was actually a lot like Friends. That one's always like reminded me of it.
The Doors' first album might be one of the best examples I've ever seen of elevating one member of the band above everybody else, because Jim Morrison's face is this huge on the cover and the rest of them are like microscopic in comparison. Great album, by the way. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it really sticks out. I don't know. Maybe it kind of gives me like an easy listening vibe, I guess. Like kind of like you think of like some of those, like, I mean, I'm sure you guys have dug through like the cheapo record section of your store, and it's like you see some of these covers and you're thinking, what the hell were they thinking? But I don't think it's that bad.
I like it. I think it's really creative, and they could have, just seeing the back cover, that beautiful sunset, that could have been the cover, and it would have worked really well. But I do think that the album art really communicates. Yeah, that would have been a great cover. But I think it really communicates well the experience that you get inside.
David, since you've done so much research on the band and probably on this album, that little picture on the left, that bush, is that Paul McCartney's face in there?
For years, I thought, hold that up, Matt. Hold it up. So this is the funniest thing. I'm going to hold up my CD here in front of me. I, for years, thought that the guy on the left was Dean and the bush on the right was Jan.
Oh.
Yeah.
For years I thought that. I mean, I just thought, well, just the rest of them, okay, they're in the clouds. That's the Beach Boys. You flip it upside down. That's the Beach Boys. But the Bushes look like Jan and Dean to me. They've always
I
looked like
totally
Jan and
see
Dean to
Jan and
me.
Dean. I totally see it too,
The,
especially with the hair that Jan had in the
that looks just
70s.
like Jan. That looks
Yeah,
like Jan to
totally.
me.
Oh
Totally.
fuck yeah, now I see it.
And then this looks
Wait,
like
is that shit
Dean.
signed, dude? What the
This looks
hell?
like Dean. I don't
Have
know who
you
it is, but it's not. That's the strange thing. It's not either one of them.
have you guys ever seen the Japanese version? It has a different back cover, and the only reason I know this is because I have the Past Masters CD. The back cover is not this sunset. It's like a picture of like the band.
Oh,
And
okay.
Hmm.
only reason I know that is if I would never have known that if I didn't have the Past Masters CD. That's the only reason I know that.
Well,
Um,
I'd real quick love to address that Bruce quote that Jake mentioned. And knowing Bruce, he may have been saying it disparagingly about the album, but I actually think that light as a feather comment is so on the money and
Yes.
to me a
Yes.
brilliant expression of what the music feels like, how it's just so airy
mhm.
and just floats through the air. It's a great way to sum up the album.
Bruce would tell you that he thinks the last great pop album ever made was 1968 Simon and Garfunkel's Bookends album. And anything after that, he just doesn't. He thinks the last Bookends was it.
Not going public.
That's a really interesting
I should get out that
perspective.
album and show you. He crossed out public and wrote private on my album.
Have you guys seen this? So there's a video of Mrs. Robinson because I know that's on that Simon and Garfunkel album that's
Yeah,
on YouTube,
great
and the
song.
top comment is like, "I didn't know Will Ferrell and Jim Carrey were in a band."
That's funny. All right, are we ready to get into the track by track rundown of the Friends album?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So, the album opens up with "Meant for You." So this is a short introduction track. That's also the shortest official song in the group's entire catalog. That said, I think it's a very pretty track. I love the stripped back arrangement with just the piano and the organ or keyboard. And I think Mike gives it a really smooth and tender vocal as well. It's also worth mentioning that the band originally intended for this song to be longer in length, and it had extra lyrics as well. If you listen to the Wake the World compilation, you can hear what this would have sounded like. Personally, though, I'm glad that they shortened the song to just being an intro and they dropped the lyrics about the pony and the puppy. I don't think they really fit in with the song particularly well, and I can see why the band decided to leave them out too. But yeah, overall, I think "Meant for You" is a pretty nice opener to the album, and I think that it kind of introduces listeners to the peaceful and laid back sound that a lot of the record has. So, Matt, what do you think of "Meant for You"?
I think it's a really nice opener. It's very calming, very soothing, very something I could put on before a transcendental meditative session. I had to get that in there, but it is a really nice opener. I don't think it's too. I think that it is short, but it works. It doesn't overstay its welcome. I know, and we'll probably talk about it. There's an extended version out there. Yeah, I really think it's a great way to start off the album. Just very calming, very peaceful, very serene, very Kama Sutra, Namaste, all that jazz.
You know those, you know that meme? It's like, yo, we're about to write the best song ever. It's only gonna be a minute. That's exactly that's the best way to describe this one. I wish it was much longer, but at the same time though, if it wasn't, like, if it was longer, would we see it as that like opener, or would it just be like just another
Another
song?
song. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's kind of working to its benefit. I think either way, I would have loved it. I know that longer version has that like those weird lyrics, I guess. I don't know. It's been a minute since I've listened to that version.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they dropped that because I think you nailed it on the head. I think if they had kept that in, this would have just been another song for me. But as like an intro, I think it's beautiful. I think it works great. So
Yeah, in a way similar to our prayer or think about the days, it's kind of like the equivalent to an establishing shot in a movie. It introduces you to the setting and to the atmosphere, and just some other standout thoughts that crept into my mind thinking about the song. Uh, One thing I think is cool is on a lot of Beach Boys songs, you have Brian or Bruce playing keyboards, but it's not very often that you have Brian and Bruce playing keyboards at the same time on a song. And I think that mix of the piano and organ sounds very lovely, and the way that that's arranged sounds very beautiful. And my other thought, and I've mentioned this before, I'm sure, but a lot of singers have a great voice, but it's one singular voice. And Mike Love has, I'd say, three or four distinct kind of voices that he can put on when the song calls for it. And to me, this is one of the earlier examples of sort of what I'd call his like singer-songwriter voice that would appear a lot throughout the 70s and throughout the rest of his time writing and recording songs. But this is definitely the introduction to that side of Mike, which I don't think we'd seen too much before on previous albums, maybe a bit on Wild Honey, but this is sort of the musical introduction to the Mike that we got to know in the 70s that was that very peaceful, meditative, hippie kind of vibe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really pleasant song.
Nate is one of those extra Mike voices, his Monster Mash voice.
Oh, of course.
I just want to say, Nate, I really like the analogy you made of this is like the opening shot of a film. I think that's a really, really poignant point. This is my kind of film. This is going to be an anamorphic CinemaScope widescreen epic because that's what I'm a sucker for.
Speaking of widescreen, it's the first Beach Boys album that was not released in mono.
Correct.
Aside from I think in one country maybe.
As a
the
fold
first
down.
time they fully embraced stereo. So that's an apt thing to bring up too. Sorry, David, go on.
Oh no worries. So yeah, this is amazingly this only took them a number 4 takes. This is take number 4 that we're hearing Monday, April 1st, 68. This is after Mike got back. This was not. It's interesting to me. I wonder, like if they were like holding on to it, knowing they wanted to make it the first song on the album, and I don't know the answer to that. But it's one of the classic. It's like the first time in their career where they knowingly create something that they're starting with, like on purpose. Like our prayer was supposed to be on Smile, right? But it ended up on 2020, and on the end of 2020, as opposed to it would have been really cool to start side 2 of 2020 with our prayer, because side 1 begins with Do It Again. But I mean, it's like this is the best. I mean, Wouldn't It Be Nice is a great album opener, don't get me wrong. And there's surfing. I could go on with the list. But Meant for You is such a distinctive, it's very Our Prayer-ish. It's very join us on this journey, spiritual thing. And they're not about to tell you what type of spiritual journey it is. They're just telling you it's for you. They're inviting you. It's one of the most inviting, lyrically inviting songs to start off an album. Because in Wouldn't It Be Nice, they ask you to imagine, wouldn't it be nice if we were married, etc. And then you're getting involved in that imaginary world if you're of that age and that was relevant to you. But with Meant for You, it didn't matter what your age was. It didn't matter who you were or what walk of life or what type of relationship you were in, because they don't address that. They're basically, as I sit and close my eyes and there's peace in my mind, I'm hoping that you'll find it too. So it's such an incredibly inviting, peaceful intention. It's the most. And again, what I love about this, because I'm not going to be talking from a commercial aspect at any point during this record, because it's not a commercial record. It's a spiritual. It's something just bleeds spirituality, and one of the cool things that I found when I started practicing TM, and Love was after me for 4 or 5 years to do it, and I kept kind of like, I'm not going to do it because a Beach Boys suggesting I do it. I didn't want to do it for that reason, and so he would say to me backstage, well, you ought to take up TM. And that would kind of go on over the years. It would just kind of be this little gentle nudge, and it was never forceful, but he would just bring it up. And I just never, I just wasn't really that inspired to do it, just because he said, he thought it was a good idea. And then in January of 2018, I was working for a gentleman who was causing me a great deal of stress. And I discovered, and this is, I'm sharing this story because I think it's just in case anybody would want to do it. It doesn't work for everybody. But so you go to a free meeting. Basically takes an hour. You ask any type of questions you want, which is something I did. I sing in an Episcopal church choir. So I was very concerned with the idea that I didn't want to get into Buddhism per se. I think that was kind of my resistance over the years. It is strictly if you want it to be. It's strictly a stress release technique. That's really what it is. That's what the mantra is for. That's the point of it. So when I was interviewing the guys, I had started doing TM, and it was interesting to me that I was asking Mike the question, okay, I listen to Friends and I've noticed it's just over 20 minutes. And you start your meditation is you close your eyes and you wait 30 seconds, roughly half a minute, before you start to think your mantra. And meant for you is just roughly a half a minute.
Just like a meditation.
And so then the album is just the length of a meditation, and then transcendental meditation, which is so opposite the rest of the music, but it does signal a return to activity. And that's what a meditation is. And I said to him, did you guys purposely make the record the length of a meditation? He said, I had no idea. No idea. So I just think that that's fascinating for what they managed to achieve accidentally or coincidentally, however it is. I just thought that that was fascinating, that it turned out to be a happy accident. You wouldn't listen to it when you meditated, but I just thought it was interesting that the cycle is that length of time. It's the shortest album they ever put out.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a hell of a coincidence there. Yeah. All right. So the second track on Friends is the title track, Friends, which was also the first single from the album. So this is listed as a Brian, Carl, and Dennis and Al co-write. I really like the song a lot. It's definitely one of the highlights of the album for me. I really love the bouncy melody, the creative instrumental arrangement with the harmonica, the saxophone, and the vibraphone, and the really great group harmonies throughout the track. Also, I think the lyrics are pretty fun in this one. In particular, I really like the line, "You told me when my girl was untrue. I loaned you money when the funds weren't too cool." I think that's kind of funny given that the band wasn't doing that well financially at the time. But honestly, I can see why this song didn't do too great as a single around the time. It doesn't really fit in with what a lot of other bands were doing at the time. But that said, I do think that it's a really strong song, and it's one of several really great waltz-style songs that Brian wrote around this time. So really great, one of the highlights of the album for me.
Yeah, it's a very fun song. I like the lyrics too, especially the part that you forgot the next line, like I talked your folks out of making you cut off your hair. That's a good line. I like the I think my favorite part of this song is like the where it's like the do 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 let's be friends, that part right there, like in the bridge. Yeah, not hard to see why this didn't chart well. What did this chart at? Let's pull it up, shall we?
It was in like the 40s on the US, and then UK was like 25 or something.
It missed 47. Yeah. Okay. So I can see why this didn't chart all that well, because yeah, it's not really like what you would hear on the radio in 1968. At least the stuff that was like, big hits. But yeah, it's a really pretty song. It's got a good message. It's got great harmonies. Backing track is great with all the instrumentation in there. Just a really nice song.
Yeah, this was one of Brian's big not ballads, waltzes. He's getting really into 3/4 time signatures. You see that kind of all over this record. I'm not I like the verses and they're very fun, but that one part where it's that part where they the vocals start, you know what I mean? That part really sells the song for me, and it shows that I don't know, Brian Wilson just had it. He could take what would have probably been like a pretty all right song for me, and then kind of just take a big right turn and just add something unexpected to it. And I really like that in this one. So while it's not my favorite on the album, I still love it.
I think this song, right off the bat, showcases that Brian had lost none of his arrangement capability, and that the songs on this album, to me, are equally as lush as the Pet Sounds or Smile songs that are very famous for having great arranging. I think the arranging on this album is just as good, if not better in places. And I think not only Brian, but a lot of producers, including Phil Spector and Jay and Barry, in the early and mid 60s, the style was to hide behind the reverb and the echo and to build these giant soundscapes where you couldn't discern any of the instruments from each other. That's something that Brian was kind of famously developing with Pet Sounds. But Friends is kind of the opposite, where there's very intentional stereo spread between the instruments, and the voices of each instrument are very clearly defined. and you have really interesting combinations. Like on this song, you have the bass harmonica played by Tommy Morgan, and you have a great vibraphone part and just very unique complementary instruments. And so to me, this album and this song in particular very much carry forward the unique arranging that Brian had been doing in the last few years, but modernizes it for the time and gives it a new spin. So I really love this song. I think the key changes are also really brilliant, how seamless they are. The song goes all over the place musically, but you'd hardly realize it when you're listening to it. It's only when you study the chords and the notes that you realize quite how complex it really is.
I love anything with strings. So anytime Brian used strings, he had me right away. And when I go back and listen, as an example, I go back and listen to the Pet Sound Sessions box, and I listened the first one, this one here. Um, when I listen to those, like I think it's "Don't Talk," put your head on my
Mhm.
shoulder, and it's just the strings.
Gorgeous.
I melt. And so when I listen to Friends, what stands Riley, the part of the song that you touched on is kind of my favorite part of the song too, where all of a sudden you have underneath you have da 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 da
Yep.
da da da
Those
da,
production touches, man.
and then their voices, "Let's be friends,"
Yeah.
da 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 da, and it's like it turned. God, we'll talk about Murray in a little bit because he's on this album, but it's almost like the da da da. It's almost like two step, side step. It's got a little bit of it right there, and it's interesting
Kentucky
because
Fried
Oh
Chicken.
the rest of
yeah.
the song is 3/4, but right there it's got this unique little shift to da da da, and it's so much going on there. I mean, this is where he brought in he had a lot of, well, comparatively speaking to some of the other tracks, he had quite a handful of people here. He had Tommy Morgan playing the standard and bass harmonicas. He had Norm Jeffries on drums, Alan Estes on vibes, Jim Ackley on keyboard, Carl playing guitar, but Jamie Liori playing sax and clarinet, Jim Horn playing sax and clarinet. So he was doubling. And then, as he was prone to do when he discovered during Pet Sounds, when he had everybody shoved into the studio, at this point, Brian was all about the bleed, right?
Mhm.
Whatever he could get to kind of happen with one another, and so that the whole sound would come together and coalesce so that you could kind of be experienced. And I love that this is a stereo record because you can almost hear Brian discovering stereo, how to navigate in it. It's like he's kind of experimenting here, but he knows this is the difference between Smiley Smile and Wild Honey. Brian knows what he wants to do here.
Mhm.
Again, this is not about writing a hit song. He just knows what he wants to do. And he came in on this record. This song was actually recorded in March. So this wasn't one of the first sessions. This came along in March. And so, he was very intent on creating this style of music because at no point, with the exception of the last track, Transcendental Meditation, he stays in the zone of what he's doing. And if you hear the early version of Transcendental Meditation,
Mhm.
it's a little bit more akin to the rest of the
Mhm.
music on this record before he got a little outlandish with it. But no, this is a wonderful track, and it speaks inherently to the intention, the spiritual intention behind the entire record.
Mhm. All right, so track 3 on the album is "Wake the World." So this is a Brian and Al co-write, and it was also the B-side to the "Do It Again" single, which was released the same year. So this is one of the shorter songs on Friends. It's just a minute and a half in length, but it's also another one of my favorite tracks on the album. I really love how the song switches from the chill and laid back verse sections, which kind of represent the nighttime in the song, if you look at the lyrics, to the really cheery and uplifting chorus, which represents the morning and the start of a new day. I also really love the instrumentation on this song as well. In particular, the tuba part during the chorus, and also the strings that come in after the opening verse of the song. I think they really give it kind of an unsettling sort of sound, which I really like. I'm kind of like you, David. I usually really like when they incorporate strings into their songs. I think that it really suits this song well. But yeah, I think it's a really nice song, and I think that the band did a really great job performing this one live as well in the late '60s. I really enjoy listening to those live versions too. So, Matt, what do you think of "Wake the World"?
Yeah, I think it's a really nice song. It's got some good lyrics. Like you said, there's the good contrast because like the choruses have a bit more fuller production with the horns, and it's a little bit louder in terms of like I guess production. Nice contrast there. Really, really nice song. A little short. I think it could, be nice if it was a little bit longer, but I really do enjoy the song for what it is. Like also like I don't know if it's just me, but I've always noticed that this song seems to fade out. It fades out as it seems like the song is still going. I don't know if that was intentional, but doesn't sound like that to anybody else. It sounds like they're still kind of like singing the song as it fades out. So I don't know if it was cut from something longer, whatever. I still really do like the song though. I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, this is probably one of my favorite songs on it. I just like the dynamics in it. I think they absolutely sell the song. I really love that live version, I think, from Live in London,
Yeah.
where Mike's like, all right, we're gonna turn the lights off real quick. Okay.
It's like, get your hands off me. Yeah.
But yeah, the dynamics sell it, and that chorus gets stuck in your head all day. I think it's one of the better written songs on the record, just from a composer's standpoint.
To me, this is one of the moments where you have a new whole sort of aspect of the Beach Boys come forward, and that's Al's sort of folky, whimsical element that he brought to the songwriting. To me, it's one of the first times that starts to come through, where you start to hear the Al sort of identity within their music instead of Al just singing something that Brian handed to him. It's like a one of the earlier times of Al, his songwriting skills coming through or his collaborative skills coming through. But for me, I used to listen to this song on the bus ride to high school when it was still dark in the morning and there was fog on the windows of the bus and everyone was cold on a rainy day. Like I would always listen to this song, so I can never really separate those memories with how I feel when I hear this song. But it brings back good memories and it's a great start your day kind of song. To me, it's like the Beach Boys response or Beach Boys version of Good Morning" from the Sgt. Pepper album.
Yeah.
That kind of feeling. So I dig it. I love it.
So my favorite group are the Moody Blues.
Mm.
The guys know that.
And
But
you knew the Beach
they're,
Boys?
they're English. They're my favorite. So I say, okay, Beach Boys are my favorite American band. But the Moody Blues, famously for me, made a distinct change in their personnel and what they were doing with their sound in '66, and that's where Denny Lane and Clint Warwick left the group, and Justin Hayward and John Lodge came in. And when they did that, they had a record deal with Durham, and they had this. I'll screw up the story, but basically they wanted to put symphonic recordings with pop music as a tryout record, as a sample for people to listen to, and that's how Days of Future Past came about. And
Wow.
so they had their songs that they had written that they came in with, and then Durham had their own ideas about what they wanted to put on that record to combine it so they could have this thing for people to hear. And to their credit, the guys came up with quite an interesting song cycle. Nights in White Satin and Tuesday Afternoon are two notable recordings off that record. But this song, Wake the World, reminds me of Dawn is a Feeling, which is one of the early songs off of the beginning of the Days of Future Past record. And it has that same essence, that same. And the Doors, Waiting for the Sun album, even though they don't, there's not a in quotes welcome to the day type of recording on it, it has the same feeling to me that Wake the World does. There's a number of songs that go across this kind of space and time, kind of 67 to 69, that different artists where I kind of get the sense of and the feeling of this type of recording. And I think this is one of the more interesting recordings on the album, but I think because it's so darn short, you couldn't really legitimize making it a single, because by this time, everything that was on AM or FM, because FM was beginning to take off, were longer recordings, right? I mean, House of the Rising Sun was longer. Anagata Davida was longer. All these songs were longer. They weren't shorter. So it would have been a real hard sell for them to try to get Capitol Records to do it. But I think Wake the World would have been a very interesting, short, single choice, because it is just, it's gorgeous. It does exactly what it's meant to do. It
What it's meant to be.
communicates It's very well.
For you?
And it still has a little bit of rock and roll in those choruses, like
Yeah,
enough to fit with their previous and future singles and sort of still trying to compete as like a pop rock outfit.
but I would say they're not competing here. I don't,
Mhm.
again, I don't think this record was made. I really genuinely, Brian's returning to the studio here. Now, a lot of this is recorded at his house, but they do go off to ID Sound and a couple of other locations for this record. And I think really, I really don't think Brian cares about that aspect of it. And because it shows. There's
Mhm.
no effort here. There's no effort to, I can't imagine he said, oh, Friends will be the single. And maybe he did. Who knows what that discussion was. But it's really hard for me to think, and I'm not talking from the Suits perspective. I'm not talking from the perspective of Capitol Records. I'm talking from Brian's artistic intention. Because all he cared about was he really went back to kind of it's not a back to basics album. It's a return to production record for Brian with his with when you listen to it, all I hear is a guy who's got one mission, and that's to write and record music that he likes, that inspires him. And that's what I hear on this record. I don't hear any effort to make a
Mm-hmm.
single. And look at the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That was a record that was not an effort to make a single. They had Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, which did all that by itself. It didn't matter which side you were listening to. So that I don't hear, and it's the same is true with Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows. So I don't hear an intention for a single. I hear a guy who wants to come in and make a long playing record. And as much as
David,
Rubber Soul,
do you think that the music Brian was writing at this time was influenced by Murray's music? To me, I hear a bit of a connection there.
I think because Murray was there for some of the sessions, and because he's on, I think, Be Here in the Morning, that whatever that relationship was at that time, because by that point his parents were living in different houses, but Audrey was still going over there because she still loved him. But this was, I think, an attempt to kind of smooth things over with their dad. Come on in, watch us do what. I mean, this is the type. This is almost the type of Murray. This is almost the type of music Murray would want them to record, right? This isn't.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, like
This isn't the
from the
Sun Rays,
heart
though. It's
kind
not
of
like
stuff.
Live
Yeah.
for the Sun, which is more pop. But yeah, this is almost a waltzy, at times a waltzy
Yeah.
jazz. This is almost a very kind of maybe Brian. This is a complete guess, but maybe Brian was just trying to impress his father to show him he could write the type of music that his father liked.
Mm.
I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but that's kind of what this is. But we talk about how it charted, but it's interesting that the album now, all these years later, people who are discovering the Beach Boys at whatever point in their lives where that's occurring, when they discover this record, they tend to like it. It doesn't necessarily beat out one of the hits or Sunflower or a Pet Sounds or Smile. But it's
Beats out Smile for me.
what's that?
Me too.
It beats out Smile for me, man.
Really?
That
Yeah.
shit's unfinished.
Smile.
I love it, but it's unfinished.
Cabinessence is hands down my favorite song by the group.
Which one?
Cabinessence.
Well, yeah, that's a great song. The
Um,
whole thing, though.
well, yeah.
4 of the songs have vocals.
But but this to me is just, again, Brian really having a vision, just like he did with Pet Sounds, having a vision and having control over that vision and knowing what he wants and getting it.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I wanted to share about this song, when Al was asked about it, since he did co-write the song, Al said that it was inspired by a conversation about people having to get up every day and go to work, something thankfully we never had to do, which I thought was a very
Asshole.
all right, so the next track on the album is Be Here in the Morning. So this is listed as a Brian, Carl, Dennis, Al, and Mike co-write. So this is another really chill and laid-back sounding song that I feel kind of represents the overall sound of the album. There does seem to be a little bit of debate over who sings the lead vocal on this. To me, the verses sound like Al singing in a higher register.
Yeah.
I've seen most historians have said the same thing, but I've also seen some people claim that it's Brian. I know that Brian does contribute some vocals during the chorus, but to my ears, the verses definitely sound more like Al. That aside, though, I think that this is a really great song. I love the catchy verses and chorus melody. the really soft and breezy instrumental arrangement, and the simple lyrics about being home alone with your lover. I also think that it's fun that they reference a few people who were in the Beach Boys circle at the time. Their manager, Nick Grillo, gets a shout out in the song, which I think is pretty fun. But yeah, I think it's just a really fun track, and it's probably one of my picks for the most underrated songs on the album. So I think it's really great.
Probably my favorite song on side one, honestly. I love this song. I do love the part where it's like no calls from Korthoff, Parks, or Grillo. I really like songs in any artist's discography. It doesn't matter who it is, that kind of like references like people in their lives. Like kind of like that's what I like about like the Battle of Johnny Yoko too, where it's, you know, like when does that part of the song go? Like Peter Brown called to say you can make it okay, you can get married and go Gibraltar near Spain. I really like when they do that, like when they reference like people in the inner circle or whatever in their lives. Yeah, I really like the opening. I love the harmonies, I love the melody. I like the lyrics. Like it's just in general, it's just a great vibe of the song. And I think this one has Murray doing the bass vocals,
Yeah.
correct? Because I think that yeah, I think that Mike was away in India. But yeah, I really, really love Be Here in the Morning. No, he wasn't away in India. Where was he?
Now, this was recorded in late March. Mike's there.
Oh, he was there. Okay, I that might be Wikipedia that said that. I don't know.
Because Mike's one of the co-writers on this one.
Yeah, Mike has a credit on it. Yeah.
But
Well,
he's not listed as a singer, so that could be Murray's voice. But there, but I just wanted to just the statement about him being away in India. He was back by that point.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking of. I'm probably mixing up two things. Whatever. I really like the song. Really, really my favorite song on side one.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you, man. Be Here in the Morning's killer. One of my favorite songs in the album. I love that little part in the middle where it's like, and then I think they also repeat that at the end before it fades. But catchy song, great verses, really catchy chorus. Be here in the morning. Is that Al doing his falsetto in the song?
Yeah, the verses, the verses are Al, I think. Like
I wish we got more of that. He sounds great. I think I said earlier in a different time we are doing this that like Al filled in for Brian on like falsetto in like 63, and I would have loved to have heard that. We hear it and it's great.
So I really love this song. It's probably one of my all-time favorites. Very, very inventive songwriting and production. But one of the reasons it's my favorite songs is it's funny that the album is called Friends, and this song literally created a friendship for me. So a few years ago, I was in Santa Monica at a guitar shop called True Tone, and I was playing a guitar and I was playing this song, and I assumed no one in the world would have any
You told me
idea
this
what I
story.
was
I remember
playing.
this.
Yeah, yeah, because it's an obscure Beach Boys album cut, but of course, of all places, someone would recognize it in Santa Monica. So I'm playing this song, playing the chords, which are quite distinctive. And from around the corner, this guy walks and he's carrying a guitar too. He starts playing along and singing the words, singing the verses. And we jammed through the whole song. And we didn't even introduce each other until the song was over. And we were like, how do you know that song? How do you know that song? Lo and behold, his name is Mike Randall, and he plays in the current incarnation of the band Love, which was a contemporary of the Beach Boys sort of at this time in the LA area. But it was just so serendipitous that I was playing a song from the Friends album and it created this little friendship. And I was so amazed that happened. So a lovely song, and I'll always remember that experience relating to it.
Wow, I love that. One of the players who's all over this record, and he's not a member of the Wrecking Crew, was Al. And I hope I'm saying his name correctly.
Vescovo? Yeah.
And this is a particular. He's quite active here. What I like about this is the oboe and the chimes. I kind of like the whole thing. It's a great. But it's interesting. There's a lyric at the end of the song that's quite interesting. I only hope that you come here alone. Was there a lurking blackmailer taking photos? I mean, it's a very strange lyric all of a sudden. But when you take this song, and I guess we'll talk to it after we go through the full song cycle, there's a whole slew of things that Brian, my Little Red Book, there's this whole slew, this whole package of recordings that he didn't complete during this period for this album that go right into that. I mean, that have everything to do with the Be Here in the Morning. It's just an album of relationships. It was the spring, I want to say spring 2023 issue of ESQ, where I devoted the entire piece
Oh, to the rum.
all the songs that Brian worked on, these relationship recordings that didn't end up on anything, that they were just incomplete and unfinished. Lonely Days, Little Red Book, all these songs, and this is one of those components, this kind of relationship component song, where it's a little bit more refined in terms of its lyrical depiction of what's going on. It's not so much a universal like Wake the World, and the title is the title itself would Be Here in the Morning. But then again, it gets into these, and Matt, like you, I'm kind of the same way. Anytime you have like a reference where you're trying to kind of dissect, when you hear it for the first time, and back when I heard this record for the first time, I didn't have Google. I had no, who these people, who are they saying? Who's the Courts Grillo? Grillo? Who's Grillo? So you're once you get to the point where you discover all the references and get into that. So like you, Matt, I'm the same way. I like kind of those reference. Ballad of Johnny and Yoko is a great example of when they reference Peter Brown. But yeah, this song for me, I think the thing that stands out, I like the singing. The guys sound great, but for me, I really like the way that Brian and Dennis are taking turns on the wordless parts in the background.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other cool part is where Brian takes that little organ solo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a shutdown solo.
Yeah. And one of the things that I meant to touch on when I interviewed Marilyn for the Wild Honey album, one of the things, and then consecutively the Friends record, so late 2017, then 2018, one of the things that I touched on with her, I said, there's a lot of songs on Wild Honey that would fit right on Friends. Like Let the Wind Blow, I'd Love Just Once to See You. The temperament and the vibe of them would fit. And I said, I almost hear a double record. Wild Honey and Friends is like a double record. And she said,
Absolutely.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it because Brian didn't stop writing. He didn't. That's when we the buying public look at records a certain way because we go to the store and we buy the record. We buy the finished product. We're not experiencing the in-studio creative process of where somebody, because art is never finished, which is Al's biggest problem. He can't. I think he's going to release the second solo record soon. I'm hopeful. So, but art is never finished. You just have to be comfortable where it is. You just have to, I've expressed enough in this. I've allowed enough of my creative process to be expressed here, and I'm now comfortable with letting it go, with letting it get out there into the world. And I think there's a lot. If you listen to a lot of the material, including Can't Wait Too Long, Wild Honey, going into Friends, there's a really interesting output from Brian there, regardless of who's writing the song with him. Musically speaking, it's pretty fascinating to me to kind of listen to both albums within the same night nowadays, consecutively, to kind of get that experience, to hear Brian kind of take back control of the reins and say, liked Wild Honey, liked what I did on these handful of songs. I'm going to continue that over here. I'm going to kind of stay in that vein of these, these soft, heartfelt relationship things, whether it's a call to wake the world or come on in and be here when I wake up. These are all really strong relationship songs.
Yeah. Two real quick things I wanted to mention. First, I listened to all the backing tracks for all of these songs that were included on the Wake the World compilation, and of all those backing tracks, this was one of the ones that really stood out to me the most. I think this is a really cool arrangement on this track. I think Brian did a great job with it. Very creative. And the other thing I wanted to mention, David, that lyric you pointed out, the "I only hope that you come here alone." I've always kind of just seen that as like him just saying like, I hope you come here alone, like as in like my lover, like I hope like we can be.
Yeah.
But now that you said that, now I'm gonna think that too. Like, what's he worried about? So. All right. So the next track on side one of Friends is "When a Man Needs a Woman." So I think that this is a fun little song. It has some nice lyrics about becoming a father, which is something that was obviously on Brian's mind at the time since Marilyn was pregnant with Carney. That said, though, I do have to say that for me, this is the first song in the album that doesn't feel quite up to par with the tracks that preceded it. In particular, the middle section of this song feels a little bit empty to me. I know on the alternate version from the Wake the World compilation that there were some lyrics included there, but even those don't really do that much for me. So overall, I think the song works fine in the context of the album, and I do always laugh at that line towards the end. A man needs a woman like a woman needs a man when the two get together. I think that's pretty funny. But yeah, it's a decent song, and it's one that I enjoy in the context of the album, but I wouldn't say it's a highlight of the record for me. So decent song, but one that I don't really come back to too often outside of the album.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with everything you said. I like it in the context of the album. I do think it's funny that it's like they make them when a woman needs a man, when a man needs a woman, they make things like "you, my son," because Brian never had any biological sons. At least he only had two daughters.
Yeah.
I don't know if they, I mean, I think they had ultrasounds back then, but whatever. Yeah, I like it in the context of the record. I do think it's a little unfinished. I think that bridge section is, I guess, like kind of funny, but it also is kind of like it kind of sounds like they're just trying to fill time. Like, oh ho 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 ho. It's like you really couldn't have written something else. Yeah, it's just fine for me. It's definitely probably like my least favorite on side one, and I don't ever listen to it outside the context of the record.
I do. I actually really like this one. It's one of my favorites. I love the guitar on it, so that might be a pretty big selling point for me. Guitar always like makes a good song 10 times better. A la maybe, I don't know. I don't know. It's just always gets stuck in my head no matter. I know the lyrics are a little like weird, but I mean, like, what's new with the band? Um, yeah, the guitar is awesome. I love the vocals on the verses. They're just so soft and calm. Really fit with the vibe of the album. And that whole chorus, when a man is a woman, like, I just always get stuck in my head. So maybe I like it a lot more than I should.
Yeah, so this one's really interesting because, all the hits for the most part that the Beach Boys are known for are very much cemented in like the junior high, high school experience. And even Pet Sounds is like largely reflective of what I'd say is kind of like the post-high school era of your life. But finally, you get to this song on this album, and it's sort of like, oh, they're not boys anymore. They're not singing about surfer girls. They're singing about having children, and that's different and unique. And it's almost like you've grown up with them listening to their catalog. And so they're at a much more adult stage in their life, which is kind of foreshadowing the fact that all the kids would be on the Sunflower cover in a few years. But yeah, it's a really charming song, and sort of like Riley was alluding to, it's got some great sort of country and Western style guitar playing and cool keyboards and organs going on. So, I'm going to keep saying this, but it's just a continuation of Brian's really inventive arranging. And yeah, it's a really lovely song. And to me, I really I frequently listen to this album, but I rarely listen to the songs individually. I almost always listen to the album in its entirety. So a lot of my feelings about the songs sort of blend into each other, and that might be why find myself repeating myself a lot tonight. But great arranging, touching lyrics, and great instrumental performances on this one too, specifically. Not as many backing vocals, if any, I don't think. It might be one of their only songs that don't have significant backing vocals. But yeah, still a lot going on to be interested by.
Well, I love the thing that I heard when I was listening to the Friends sessions on this track. It reminded me a little bit of Evanescence. I really like David
Hmm.
Cohen's guitar playing here. It's Evanescence to me, if it were a painting, would be Norman Rockwell's Freedom from Want. Um, it's that kind of thing, or a painting of Ma and Pa Kettle with the country behind him, one of the two. But this song is like the Friends album is like a Norman Rockwell to me.
He's my favorite painter.
And so there's this element like exactly what you were touching on, Nate, and I think you guys. I don't listen to these songs individually. I mean, I'll hear Friends if it's on like a greatest hits compilation or something, but
Mhm.
outside of that, this record, that I think that's why this record remains so special to me, is because it's only listened to in long form. You know,
Hmm.
it's easy to do that. Um, the story is, here's Marilyn's response when I asked her, "Men Needs a Woman" mentions a son, but this was prior to Carney being born. She said, "We didn't know if we were going to have a boy or a girl." I think the word son in this song was just like saying God is a man. Since
Yeah,
since Brian wrote this before Carney was born, he wouldn't have made the relation to a daughter at that point. And Carney's name is actually Carnation. They
Oh,
they they had a whole bunch of different names they came up with, and they didn't like them, so they started talking about flowers and different names of flowers. And they came to Carnation, and then Brian said, "Why don't we just shorten it and call her Carney?" That's how
oh
they ended
Brian.
up with that. But it's interesting, when Carney graduated from high school, she had them put Carnation Wilson on her diploma.
mm.
So I thought
Wow,
that
I
was
never knew that.
yeah, it's an interesting little tidbit. But I like this song because again it because of the country kind of flavored style of the guitar, and this is kind of a just like the song Cabin is to a degree, and Went to Sleep is, and Time to Get Alone is, and Let the Wind Blow is. This is one of those. I like the Friends album a lot because there's so much atmospheric listening for me. It's a really atmospheric thing, regardless of what's being said. And I think what's being said lyrically is what kind of ties it all together and makes it more of even more atmospheric. Very few records, Bookends is a great example. Days of Future Past, Pet Sounds, are all great listening. Today, the Today album, even the Party album, great listening from beginning to end records. But this 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 is like coming into a room and sitting down and just like, as Brian has recommended for Pet Sounds, putting headphones on. But this is just like a warm candle to me. This is like being in a room with a single warm candle with the lights turned low and you're looking out your window and the sun is setting. That's what this whole album is for me.
All right, so the final track on side one of Friends is Passing By. So re-listening to the album for this episode, this is probably the song that grew on me the most. I used to consider the title of this song very fitting because whenever I listened to this song, it pretty much did just pass me by and not stick with me at all. However, after re-listening again for the first time in a while, it's honestly better than I remember it being. It has a nice laid-back groove to it with the keyboard, drums, and Brian's humming. And I also really like the keyboard solo and the little guitar lick that follows each verse section. I know this is another one of the songs in the album that originally had more lyrics, but again, I think that the band made the right decision dropping them. Listening to that rough demo, I don't really think the words add much to the song. They're kind of just copying the melody. And I actually think that they would take away from the song's calming sound. So personally, I'm glad that they left them out of the final version. All that said, though, I think this is a decent album track that fits in well with the other songs in the album. But I still wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. And I do wish that it was a little bit shorter than it is. I think they could have trimmed like a minute or so off of this. But it has grown on me for sure.
I wouldn't trim a minute of it. I really like it. I think it's a great way to finish off side two or side one. I'm sorry. I think it's a real, like I said, I think you said well, Jake, it has a great groove. It's got a nice laid back vibe to it. Like I like the keyboard sound. I love just the harmonies. It's just one of those, like I said, it's a great like ambient track, and I appreciate a great ambient track. And I can definitely, I think looking at the back cover now, this is kind of like a song I could just listen to like on the beach, just kind of vibing there. I really, really enjoy this cut a lot. I'm very glad it's on the record.
Yeah, wouldn't shorten a second of it. This was actually always one of my favorite tracks on the album. I know I've always kind of stuck up for the instrumentals, and I always mention the surf ones. I always mention Let's Go Away for a while, and Pet Sounds, the title track, is some of my favorite tracks from the band. But holy shit, this song is so good. I love the fact that, I mean, it's not really an instrumental. It does have vocals on it. The vocals are what carry the song for me. It's just some of the best harmony work they've done. I guess not really in a long time, because Heroes and Villains is fucking incredible, but it's just like they kind of pulled this one out of nowhere. I didn't really expect this song on the album. So fantastic track. One of their best instrumentals, honestly. And I always find myself coming back to this one. This is one I will cherry pick from the album.
Well, that's a perfect transition to what I was going to say, that I think I'm not alone in saying that Bruce Johnston is one of the greatest keyboard players in rock and roll history. And there aren't too many Beach Boys songs where Bruce got to show off his keyboard playing, but this one is definitely one of them. And the keyboard playing is just really sophisticated, but also really tasteful and not overplaying. Just really great textures and really great voicings on the keyboard itself with the different keys. So really, really neat song for sure.
Yeah, so I want to just tell anyone watching this that I believe it's available anywhere digitally. The Wake the World, the Friends sessions are out on all the streaming platforms. So if you're curious about some of the sessions that took place during the timeline that this album represents, which is February through May, the end of May, I check those sessions out, and there's also 2020 sessions out there too. Check that stuff out. It's kind of a shame that both of those releases didn't get physical release because they're so essential. So for me on this song, and the original lyrics that you'd get to hear by if you go out and listen to it is, while walking down the avenue, I stopped to have a look at you, and then I saw you're just passing by. Um, without that, without the lyric being realized, fully realized, I'm glad they left those off. Unless Brian opened the song with them purposely, with the intention of not singing anything else than just that. I think that would have been an interesting choice too, to kind of get the listener thinking, "Oh, okay, what's this?" And then he's singing, and then there's no more except the the rest of the way. That would have been. I don't know if it would have been good or if I'd like it as much, but it would have been an interesting choice. The other thing that sticks out to me, it's one of the most fascinating on the to a degree, for me, one of the most fascinating moments on the album, where at the 127 mark, it sounds something like an angry bee kind of creeps into the song, because there's a heavy buzz and it gets louder and louder until it almost starts to overwhelm the mix, and then it cuts off abruptly at 120. So it's not there very long, but it's very interesting. And in addition to Bruce's keyboard, which he's so great on this track, is Carl's 12th string and how it descends and in the loop. That's just another great thing. And to me, a lot of these music on this album, Brian's producing. He's kind of in charge. But what I'm hearing is very much almost like a Wild Honey type of thing, where all the guys are like like Brian when Pet Sounds or whatever, and somebody would make a suggestion to him, like Al DeLore playing the part of the song, and he go, "Oh, let's do that." That's one of the great things that I don't think people don't talk about enough when it comes to Brian, because we talk about Brian's incredible arrangements as a songwriter, a producer, and an arranger. One of his greatest strengths, to me, was his availability to being a sponge to whatever was taking place. And if he heard something like, yes, the collaborator in Brian, and being a sponge with the Wrecking Crew cats, and then being that open with the Beach Boys, if they would make a suggestion to him, he'd go, "Oh yeah, let's try this. Let's do it." And that's what I hear a lot on this record.
All right, so now let's flip the record over and start off side two. So side two of Friends opens with Annalie the Healer. So this is a Brian and Mike composition that was inspired by a masseuse that Mike met while he was in India. And it's probably my other pick for the most underrated song on the album. I've always really loved this one a lot. I think it has a super catchy melody and a really great lead vocal from Mike during the verses. I also think that the stripped back arrangement really suits this track well. I feel that it lets the guys' voices really shine, especially during the chorus. But yeah, I think it's a great song, and it always surprises me a little bit when I see people say that they don't like this one. I guess maybe the lyrics or the subject matter maybe weird some people out, but personally, I really love it, and I think it's just classic Brian and Mike songwriting. So I really love this one a lot.
Yeah, I love this song too. I definitely agree with you. It's slept on. You don't hear people talk about this one that much, but it really is good. I really like the it's like bongos or whatever, like that drum sound. I really like that. It's very like stripped back arrangement. Really like the lyrics, super catchy melody. I don't really think people might think it's creepy. I don't really think it's creepy because
I
it's
don't
I
either.
say
I've seen people say like it weirds them out, like the whole like the healing hands and stuff. I don't know. Some people are weirded out by it.
no, I just think it's about, like I said, it's about a masseuse. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
depending on how dirty of a mind you have, you can think it's about something else. But no, I really enjoy the song. I think it's a great way to start off side two, and it's definitely one of my favorites on the record. And it's one of my favorites from the era, that like late '60s era.
Yeah. It's not Annalie the hooker. Like
Yeah, no, it's not all I want to do on 2020 with the hooker in the end.
Yeah, dude, I love this one. Super underrated, and I'd never see it mentioned. Maybe it is just the lyrics, but I've never really interpreted that way. I kind of just saw it as your average weird Beach Boys song. Like they just have those songs, and they're still bangers. We're looking at you, roller skating child. But yeah, and it's just super catchy. It's always gotten stuck in my head, and I could say that about a lot of the songs on here. Like they're not your average Brian Wilson hooks. They are a bit different compared to the hooks on like I Get Around or even like stuff on Sunflower. This very unique song, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, to me, this one kind of has a lot of that. Well, let me rewind a bit and say that Mike has always credited R&B as a huge influence on his songwriting.
Mhm.
And even though the arrangement doesn't lean into R&B very much, I think the composition itself and what Mike had in mind was probably a bit of a R&B Smokey Joe's Cafe kind of thing with the 1 4 5 chord progression, sort of a little bit like Kokomo in a way. Um, but something that just popped into my mind as we were talking about this song to make another Elvis comparison is with the way that this song is so sparsely arranged with just the bass and the percussion. It reminds me a lot of the earliest Elvis recordings that he did with Sam Phillips before Sam Phillips would even allow drums in his studio when they would just use the back of an acoustic guitar or handheld percussion in the place of a snare drum. So to me, it does have a bit of a Sun Records kind of sound to it with the sparse bass and percussion. So it's a really unique song. In a way, it's kind of surfy too. It has a little tinge of that surf element with the way that the bass is playing and the sound of the bass. But yeah, just a really to me, it's like the essence of this song sounds like something that Mike brought with him from India, mixed with a bit of that classic Mike R&B 50s kind of feel that he brought to the band quite often.
I love that. I love what everybody's touched on. You know, so I asked Mike about this song, and he said Anna Lee she was a German lady who was on the course in India, and she had these special healing hands. I guess that's what if I'm remembering our conversation right, when he told me that, he didn't use the term masseuse, but it was like it was her thing. Like she could heal you with her hands.
Mhm.
He didn't explain. I don't know if she just put her hands on your shoulders or what the deal was. He didn't go into that much detail. But if you had ache or pain
Fascinating.
somewhere, he did say, if you had an ache or pain somewhere, she could actually put her hands on you and heal your pain. Subsequently, she came to the States and stayed as a guest at my house in Santa Barbara. So so she was a part of that. And I don't know if we'd be able to pick her out of a photo with Donovan, the Beatles, and Mike, but she's in that somewhere. Um, and what I like about this song is two things. At one moment in the song, their voices sound like they're like super close to the microphone. I mean, it's just so intimate. And then there's another point where the song where it's kind of like it's expansive. So there's both the intimacy. There's also I hear both the intimacy and the expansiveness of it, and it's all in one recording. And the Beach Boys do that all the time in their songs, and I just really that's what stands out to me about this recording, is that it has both. And so this was one of the first things they did when Mike came back, because this is April. This is April. Well, it's not one of the first things. It was about the third thing they worked on. This is April 2nd, this recording. And it took 37 takes. So this one took a little bit longer than most of the other ones, because the other ones didn't take nearly as much. With Passing By took 27 takes, but you get the idea. This is a I like it for all the reasons everyone's touched on, and I just think it's a good lead song for a side from the standpoint of actually getting up and flipping the record over on a turntable. I like it that way too.
We
Yeah, I
can
really
edit this out, but Annalie could heal with her hands, but evidently she couldn't grow hair with her hand.
I'm
I'm
not
just
That's
saying
that's
with
a good one.
Mike.
You don't want Christian to hear that, Nate.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Well, it wasn't causing him any pain because it wasn't there to cause any.
Yeah, there you go.
She didn't replenish. That lyric is not in there, right?
Yeah.
Sha-na-na,
Yeah.
sha-na-na, sha-na-na.
yeah, blow. Yeah.
He threw it in a sock.
Do it in a sock. Yeah. All right, so the next track on Friends is Little Bird. So this song was originally credited to Dennis and Stephen Kalinich, but according to Stephen, Brian pretty much reworked or rearranged the entire song. So for that reason, I don't really consider this to be like a complete Dennis song. Like, I know a lot of people think it's one of his like first early songs. I don't really view it that way now that I know that. That said, though, I think Dennis gives us a really great lead vocal and really makes the song his own. I also really love the instrumental arrangement with the cellos, the trumpet, and the banjo. It's just a really well-written, produced song. I especially love that intense bridge section, like the "Where's my pretty bird? He must have flown away." I really think that that's really cool, and I also love the group harmonies throughout the song as well. Just really great vocals throughout it. I also really like the lyrics too. I especially like the line "Dawn, bird still gone. Guess I'll go mow the lawn." Another one of those kind of slice of life lyrics, which I always like in songs. So, yeah, it's an awesome track. Definitely one of the highlights of the album for me. And honestly, I'd say it's a standout of the band's entire late '60s period. So, it's one of the songs that I come back to the most on Friends.
Jake, man, you're like taking all the words out of my mouth. Seriously though, yeah, I really do love this song. I love Dennis's kind of earthy vocals on this song. I think this is almost kind of like an earthy song, if that makes sense. So his vocals fit on it. Yeah, this is it's a very like peaceful song for me. Very like, just like, little bird up in the tree sang a song to me, the trout in the shiny brook. I love the part where it's like, what a day, what a day. I think that's Carl on that. It's a
Yeah,
great part of the
Carl.
song. And then I also love like kind of in the second part of the song where it's like they sing it like little bird look down and sang a song to me. I just really love the whole arrangement of this cut. But yeah, I also love the part about the, let's guess I'll go mow the lawn, which I hate doing, but that's like my least favorite chore. But yeah, no, I really, really, really enjoy this song. I definitely agree. Highlight of the record and highlight of the whole period. This one has shown up on quite a few compilations, if I'm not mistaken, and it makes sense why it does show up on compilations because I do think it stands alone on its own. And I believe this was a B-side, right? To some
Yeah.
to Friends. Okay, yeah. So this one does have a. I know we talked earlier about that this was the first song, our first album in stereo, and that is true. But I do think that the 45 of Friends and Little Bird do have dedicated mono mixes, and they're I think
You're
the
right.
only songs. They're like some of the only songs that actually have true mono mixes. If you find a mono Friends, otherwise it's just a fold down. But yeah, love this song.
Yeah, it's just easily, not easily, but I would say it's like the highlight of the record, and it's also just era defining for the band. I do kind of hear Dennis's influence in the song. He definitely wrote a good part of it. The chord progression and just the general descending part sounds a lot like something Dennis would do. And he just gives a killer chill vocal. He always kind of had that in him. In that bridge, man, holy shit! Brian wrote that.
That was 100%.
That was all Brian. That was him. And I just love this song. I mean, you guys already said a lot that there needs to be said about it.
Yeah, to me, this song, like Jake said, Brian obviously did have a hand in it, but to me, it's very much still Dennis because to me, a through line of Dennis's material, whether it's this or Ecology or River Song, but a lot of Dennis's work deals with the subject matter of nature. So, so this song is sort of the beginning of that. And like Riley pointed to, I think even musically, it foreshadows Pacific Ocean Blue quite a bit with the fact that it still has the vibe and the feeling of the Friends album, but it's a little bluesier, little edgier. The drums have that, backbeat on the 2 and 4, And so to me, this song is sort of a preview of what Dennis would do with some stuff like Friday Night and River Song and things like that. So a great, Dennis did have some co-writes on the album, on this album as well. But in terms of songs that he brought to the table, this is a great introduction to the world of Dennis's songwriting. And for that matter, to Steve's too, his first
Yes.
credit on a Beach Boys album. And he'd go on to write a lot of songs with them throughout the decades.
Dennis plays the harmonium on this track. I want to make sure.
Which, for those who don't know, is a keyboard that you play using pedals with your feet to propel air out of the organ. So it's like a true machine, you know?
So this another string. Here we have strings again. And I absolutely love I can remember, I don't remember when I heard this song the first time, but when I listened to the Friends album for the first time, I got the Friends Wild Honey 2020 and Smiley Smile records from the 74 Warner Reprise releases where they were two record sets in the beige jackets. So when I heard these records for the first time, I didn't have the original artwork. I had these generic beige jackets with girl silhouettes in front of a palm
and like a bikini, right?
Yeah.
Pictures
So
of bikini.
I didn't have my reference when I listened to these records was, well, this is interesting, but I didn't have the original reference. So I just went by what I was experiencing from the listening standpoint, not what I was seeing visually from the packaging standpoint. And what, we've got Al Vescovo here again, playing banjo and guitar. We have Lyle Ritz on this with electric and upright bass. I mean, and I think all that stuff comes from Brian. I think Brian saw what his brother was doing and knew how to arrange around the construct of what Dennis created with Steve Kalinich. And it's interesting that there were some lyrics that they took up, that they completely changed, which were some of the original lyrics. This is what Steve Kalinich told me. Before things become real, they are first in your mind. A love that draws others of its kind. So cling to every thought that's real and your life will be free. Free from toil, free from strife, free from chains that you hold down. And Dennis did not like the word strife. So they cut that section out of the song. It's almost a good thing they did, because those lyrics don't fit.
No, they don't.
That nature element of what the song is about. The trout and the brook, the bird and the tree, that atmospheric element again. And this is where Brian, to his credit, knew and I'm sure we don't talk about Carl in this moment, but, Carl, these brothers were so uniquely connected, having sung together in their bedroom as kids, that when they were here at this point in their lives and in a career, whether Carl was playing guitar or not, this element of this kind of dialed into how inherently being able to help one another reach their full potential was in full bloom. And Brian comes in and creates this bridge, this kind of section that connects the feeling of what the music and the lyrics are communicating so well that I love it. I love it, and it is. Which one of you said? Maybe it was Riley. How much of a surprise this song is when you get to it on the record. You get to it, and it's just such a. Maybe because it's the guy who sings "Catch a Wave" is suddenly singing a song, because we didn't really get a lot of Dennis on "Smiley Smile" or "Wild Honey." It had been a while, or Pet Sounds, so it had been a while since we really got to hear him. And now not only were we hearing him sing a song, but it's a song he's contributed to musically and lyrically, what's mostly Kalinich's lyrics. But I just love that this was kind of Dennis's premiere, and Brian did such an incredible and remarkable job of taking his brother's construct of a song and just making sure, getting right behind it 100% and making sure it could reach its full potential.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the magic of the song is really what Brian did with it, with the production, and the lyrics from Stephen Kalinich are great as well. And I'm sure, Dennis had the original idea, but what Brian transformed this into is just incredible. So yeah, it's definitely one of the highlights of this entire era of the band for me. So also it's
an example of some Smile material making its way onto one of their later albums, even though unlike 2020, they're not taking a recording from the Smile sessions. They're sort of reusing a lot of the ideas from Child is the Father of the Man in the bridge on this song.
Yeah. I also wanted to mention I love how the vocals kind of like drop during that bridge like that. Ooh, I really love that. It's like so like smooth. It has like such like a very like ethereal kind of haunting sound to it. I just love that. So
I thought you were doing an impression of Make It Good at first.
no, that's no look. No, this was yeah. All right, so the next track on Friends is Be Still. So this is another song that's credited to Dennis and Stephen Kalinich. But in this case, I think it's more of an actual Dennis composition, unlike Little Bird. I know there's people who really like this song, but I have to say it's never really been a big favorite of mine. For me, it almost feels a little too stripped back, like it's a demo of something that Dennis had started working on but hadn't quite finished. I know Nate has said before that some of Dennis's songs sound like incomplete ideas, and that's pretty much how I see this one. There's potential there, but it's just not really fleshed out enough to interest me. I still think that the song fits in fine on the album since it does have that really kind of chill and relaxed vibe that most of the record has. But in this case, it's just a little too bare for my liking. So I don't think it's a bad track, but I think that Dennis has done much better, and he would go on to do much better.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I do think I love the stripped back arrangement with like just Dennis's vocal and the organ or whatever it is. I think it's a very moving song. Very haunting vocal from Dennis, very haunting ambience of the track. But I do kind of get what you're saying, Jake. I think it could have been fleshed out a little bit more. It could have been built out a bit. I do enjoy it for what it is, but I wouldn't say it's like my favorite on the album or anything. But I still do enjoy the song, and I do think I think it's a good bridge between Little Bird and the song that comes next. I think it fits well, and its placement on the album is good. Yeah, but I don't think it's Dennis definitely had. I think there's much better songs that he would write to come, and I think there are better songs he did with Stephen Kalinich in the future. Like, I know, for example, I think they did Rainbows together on Pacific Ocean Blue. I love that song; it's one of my favorites of his. So, but yeah, I still enjoy it for what it is. But definitely a bit of a exercise, more of an songwriting exercise, I would say, than like a truly great song.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's unfinished, man. From what I understand, Dennis, or not Dennis, Steven had a poem called Be Still, and it was just Dennis putting an organ to it pretty much. So even maybe it's not so much unfinished as it's just very bare. It's just kind of an organ and Dennis, which is a cool vibe. I've always kind of liked that when Dennis gets really down to earth with that stuff, but it's just Dennis reading off a poem with a little bit of organ in the background. Not much else to it. It's probably a low point of the album, but it's still like enjoyable. It's just to call it like a masterpiece would be blowing it out of proportion.
Have people called it a masterpiece? I don't think I've heard that.
There's
Probably the same people that like Make It Good.
Oh yeah.
Or Hey Little Tom.
Jake loves Hey Little Tomboy.
It's a catchy melody. I don't love the lyrics.
I mean, some people say Pom Pom Playgirl is underrated, so you know.
I do. But anyway, like David was saying about Brian being a great supporter to his brother, this is another good example because it's actually Brian playing the organ from what I've read, which was a really interesting revelation to me. I always assumed it was Dennis since he wrote the song and since he was starting to play the keys around this time quite a bit more. But yeah, this is another song. I brought this up already, but this was an album that was really near and dear to my heart when I was in high school. And the way that this song is very encouraging and supportive and uplifting was a great message for me to hear at the time and really resonated with me when I was maybe growing up and going through some things. And maybe now at this point in my life, it might not be as moving, but back then when I needed to hear those words, it sure as hell was.
What I like about this song is its vulnerability. That's it. Dennis is really vulnerable. This is, a willingness to take a poem and just, with Little Bird, Dennis kind of relies on Carl a little bit to sing along with him to kind of, flesh out the song and give it a little more meat on the bone.
Mm-hmm.
Here he just, and it clearly, they collectively, not just Dennis, but Brian too, because he plays the organ. This was a collective decision to let it stand on its own and be vulnerable. And I really like that about the recording.
Yeah. I did want to mention that on the Wake the World compilation, there's an alternate version of this song where they're actually like playing like piano chords. It's not just like the organ, it's actually like chords. And I
Yeah, it's
don't
got a
think,
bit more groove.
right, I don't think that that would have fit well on Friends, but in terms of like the actual recording, I wish Dennis had put a vocal over that, honestly, and like put it
Yeah.
out in 2020 or something. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. It feels like much more of a song, even though it's still pretty simple. So, all right, so the next track on the album is Busy Doing Nothing. So this is a bossa nova style song from Brian, and it's also one of the only tracks on the album that features only session musicians and none of the other Beach Boys. Despite the other guys not really playing on the song, I'd say it's actually my favorite track on the album. I absolutely love everything about it. I think it has a really catchy melody that's fun to sing along with. I love the carefree kind of slice of life lyrics. I especially like when Brian gives step-by-step directions to his house during the first chorus. I think that's pretty funny. And I also really love the instrumental arrangement on the song as well, with the horns and the acoustic guitar. It really helps give it that kind of bossa nova sound that Brian was aiming for. So, amazing song, and another one of my favorites from this era of the band. I come back to this one a lot. So, what do you guys think of Busy Doing Nothing?
Great song, first of all. Bossa Nova, Brazil shout out. Awesome. Love that. I do like the lyrics, like you mentioned. Like I think we've talked about this quite a bit throughout the episode, this like slice of life.
Yeah.
Almost kind of stream of consciousness in a way, some of it at least. Not
Yeah.
maybe not like super duper so, but like at least it's something that, like I wrote a number down, but I lost it, so I searched through my pocketbook. Like it almost just sounds like you're like he's just like kind of like just saying whatever comes to mind.
Yeah.
But yes, I do love the part you mentioned where it's like he kind of gives you direction how to get to his house. It kind of almost makes you wonder, did anyone put two and two together and actually try to go to the house using
Jeffrey
this?
Foskett did.
You have to know the starting location, though. That's
Yeah,
the
you'd have to know the starting location. Yeah. But yeah, I love the backing track, like you said too, with the horns and everything. This is a very, very awesome cut. One of my favorites on the album, one of my favorites from the era. It is so quintessentially Brian Wilson. It's fun, it's playful, it's melodic, it's bouncy. It's just a great song. I really, really enjoy it.
I've heard that between the instructions in this song and the stained glass window from Wild Honey, that's how Jeffrey Foskett was able to get to Brian's house for the first time to meet them. And that may just be legend, but I do recall hearing that story.
interesting.
Which is amazing knowing the relationship that they would go on to have and how instrumental Jeff would be in Brian's life later on. But anyway, this is a really, really great tune. I think it's very much shows you some of the things that you would hear on 2020 and Sunflower with that kind of breezy, sunny kind of sound, slice of life, as you guys put it. But then it also just had this great bossa nova influence. And my friend Mike Gaudet pointed out one time to me that the bridge goes into like a 7/8 time, which he said to his knowledge was the only time that a Beach Boys or Brian Wilson song does that, which is pretty neat. But yeah, great playing, and I love hearing Brian and Marilyn sing together. They got a great blend, and it's used to great effect on this song.
This marks the only time that Tom Scott played on a Beach Boys record,
Oh wow.
which is something. Yeah, he plays the bass flute on this. This was originally called Even Steven, and again, highly recommend anybody to go out and listen to the Friend Sessions Wake the World. You're going to hear a whole this song fits very well in with the My Little Red Book and Lonely Days and all that stuff. I like it as a part of this record. With the other stuff, following Dennis's really vulnerable state, vulnerable vocal, to have this kind of change of pace. You go from this really vulnerable thing, you go from nature to vulnerable, and Dennis's Be Still, he very much like Meant for You. In Be Still, he's asking you to be still. That's the whole point of that recording. And if you know Steve Kalinich at all, Stevie is all about getting people to slow down and just take a deep breath and settle. And so this, so then to be followed by directions to somebody's house, whether, I got my pocketbook and all this stuff. It's just, it's very, again, this is this Norman Rockwell thing. But what I really, really love about this recording, this is where anything that Brian may have or may not have picked up from Carlos Jobim really kind of comes into play here, because you hear the Brazilian samba type of vibe thing going on, and it's unique to this record. Um, and I think I love it for that reason. I don't think I think Matt was said it earlier. I don't think there's anything on this album where you're going to go, so oh, this is a masterpiece. It was never intended to be such. This record was just intended to be an experience, and whatever we subjectively get from it is what it ends up being. But yeah, I really like. Now I've heard two different stories. I've heard conflicting stories. I've heard, yes, if you start at the right point, you can get to Brian's house. But it was either Carney or Marilyn who dismissed that and said, no, that's not true. So I'm trying to place. I want to say it was Marilyn who said it, but I can't place it's not in my interview material. I think I heard. I don't remember where I heard it, but I heard that dispute. But I've heard most of the time that if you started at the right location, you could indeed find Brian's house with a big wild honey stained glass window. And I know that's how Foskett did spot the house. He knew where he generally
Okay, I knew I
lived.
wasn't making that up.
And he knew that Brian had the big stained glass window, and he was driving around the neighborhood until they spotted the stained glass window. And that's how it was around 76, I believe. And that he rang the bell and said, "Hey, I'm Jeffrey Foskett," and he was with I want to say Jim Armstrong. I think that's right. And
Yeah, that who
said,
just passed away.
yeah, and said, "Yeah, we're big fans. We'd like to come in," and he buzzed them in. Can you imagine?
So wild.
So sure, come on in.
Yeah.
I thought that was crazy, but yeah, love this song. But as much as I love this song, what comes next is the highlight for me.
I also wanted to mention, David, you said how you don't really view it like there's really any like true masterpieces on this album, like some of Brian's other work in like the mid 60s. But like for me, like I don't view the song necessarily as a masterpiece, but I enjoy it just as much as some of their masterpieces. I think it's just such a vibe too. And, Brian's just kind of carefree lyrics, like you said, Matt, kind of like off the cuff, like he's just writing it as he goes. And yeah, I just think it's really great. It's really catchy and it's fun to sing along to. So.
And it marks really, this is kind of, I think, I don't know if this is completely true because I'm trying to think of the songs from Pet Sounds onward to this point. With Pet Sounds, very emotive, right? Yeah. What we experienced from Brian as an individual, even though Tony Asher wrote most of the lyrics, it was a communication between the two of them.
Yeah.
This is a song that's not as much as anything we heard on Pet Sounds or anything in between, where Brian is telling you about himself. But this is kind of, silly's the wrong word. This is lighthearted Brian. This isn't like heavy emotive. This is kind of him, which again I think points to him really having a clear vision about what he wanted for this record, and it not being a Pet Sounds, right? Not the heavy emotive thing. Instead, he's going to take what he's picked up along the way from music that he's hearing on the radio. And this is something I love. Gary Griffin shared this with me once. I think it's 64 or 65 timeline. He told me, Dave, it was the most fascinating time of my life, where every day you would wake up and you couldn't wait to turn on the AM radio because you knew the next day when you turned on the radio, you would hear something that much more progressive than the day before.
Wow.
And that must have been quite that 64 through 67, 68 timeline where every day you turned on the radio, whatever new was on the radio was just that next step.
Yeah.
I love Brian for this recording because he just kind of, in line with the rest of the Friends album, he just says, come on, let's be friends. This is meant for you. And now I'm gonna more or less tell you how to get to the house, and I'll buzz you in.
It's interesting too, because to this point, most of the songs he'd written with Mike or Roger Christian or Jan Berry or Van Dyke Parks, but this is one where, for the first time in a while, it's just Brian writing by himself.
Yeah, and the recent ESQs that I've been doing, particularly this one, great interview with Cheryl Pomeroy, who was Sherry of Bob and Sherry, and Vicky Coker, who is now Victoria Hale of Bob and Vicky.
Bob and Vicky, yeah.
And Sharon Marie, who's coming out in the new edition. All of them talked about Brian's love of R&B. And we don't hear that often. We don't hear about that often. We know I think fans collectively know that Brian loved R&B, and we and collectively like doo-wop, and that he loved the Four Freshmen and Dick Reynolds. And then he got exposed to Dick Reynolds working on half of the Christmas album, but in '64. But we don't really hear that much about Brian from the standpoint of his love of R&B. We don't really. There's never really been deep discussion about that,
Right.
and I think that shows up a lot on this record.
Hmm.
Uh, it's kind of like he's sneaking it in with the jazz and the Joe Beam and the Bacharach vibe. But at the root of it, like you guys talked about Annalie the Healer, I think it was you, Nate, you talked about how Mike is working the doo-wop R&B element into it. And I
Hmm.
think this record is kind of uniquely jazz, R&B, Brazilian, samba, R&B record.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's all that stuff in one record, and it's that I think it's fascinating for that reason.
David, what you said earlier about how like at the time like you turn on the radio and like you'd hear something new and like progressive every day. That kind of reminded me of there's that radio interview that interview that Brian did around this time that this album came out in 1968. And I think he says in that interview, you can find it on YouTube. I'm sure you've heard it, but he says something along the lines of like, yeah, like I keep hearing these new Beatles songs and like I don't know what kind of techniques or studio trickery they have access to or what they're doing, but like it just like blows my mind, you know. So I think that kind of shows how like yeah, like when you turn on the radio and you hear something new and you're like, how the hell are they getting that sound, you know? So I think even Brian kind of reflects that in that interview. So all right, so the next track on the album is Diamond Head. So this is the album's only true instrumental, since Passing By does technically have some hummed vocals. I saw someone describe this track as psychedelic Hawaiian music, which I think is a perfect description for it. I really love the creative arrangement of both instruments and sound effects and how they kind of blend together to make this really cool soundscape. I especially love the use of Hawaiian guitar and ukulele. I think they really give the track that kind of cool tropical sound that it has, along with the ocean and the water sound effects. And yeah, I think it's a really neat instrumental, and it's one that I feel sometimes gets overlooked or forgotten about by fans. I have read before that this wasn't really much of a Brian track, despite him having a writing credit. Maybe David, you can go a little bit more into that. But that said, I do really love this song, and it sure would have been a really great way to close the album. But unfortunately, this was not the last track in the albums. But Matt, what are your thoughts on Diamond Head?
Well, Nate, going back to what you were saying earlier when you said this reminds me of like Blue Hawaii and the Elvis one, this was the first song that came to mind when you mentioned that. I really enjoy this track a lot. Another great like kind of ambient vibey track where you it kind of feels like you're in Hawaii, kind of like on the beach or whatever. I know you mentioned Jake that this is not really a Brian song. I know that the only thing I know, and obviously David go in more detail, this was kind of like improv in the studio or kind of like come up with
Yeah.
on the spot in the studio. And so the songwriting credit was given to Alvis Covo, Lyle Ritz, Jim Ackley, and Brian. So I think the other three were like all working on the track. According to Wikipedia, Lyle Ritz was known for ukulele and bass. So he was probably the one playing the ukulele on this track. Love the choice of instruments. Love the arrangement, love the way it sounds. Really enjoy this song, and I totally agree this would have been a great closer. Unfortunately, we kind of have, in my opinion, a very anticlimactic closer on this record, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, so to me, I sort of think of this song and Cool Cool Water as cousins, so to
Hmm.
speak. And they both remind me very much of like a Disneyland ride. Sort of like if any of you got, oh, Matt, I know you're a big amusement park guy. Like the beginning of Pirates of the Caribbean, when you're just riding through the caves with all the lights and everything, it totally reminds me of that. And when I listen to it, I can picture like riding in a boat while the music plays and seeing what you go past. It's like the musical equivalent of experiencing that. And I'll say that easily one of the greatest musical experiences of my life was hearing the Brian Wilson band perform this when they did their Something Great from '68 tour a few years ago. And I had seen that they were playing this on the set list, but when they finally went into it, I turned to my buddy and I said, how the hell are they gonna recreate this on stage? It's with all the zany effects and sounds, but they did it, and I couldn't believe how accurate it sounded. And from what I recall, you had Matt Jardine making a percussive sound with like leaves or branches from palm trees or something along those lines, and just like came up with all these creative ways to recreate the sounds from the record. And it just totally, totally blew me away. And the song, it never clicked for me before that. But then hearing them play it on stage with Brian there and Al there, it just was so neat and it really made the song click for me.
So I had one of the questions I had asked Marilyn about this song was, I said, is it accurate that Diamond Head is more or less an original Brian Wilson form of Hawaiian jazz? And she said yes. On Diamond Head, Brian was just hearing music and putting it down. The song didn't need voices, and the inspiration was Diamond Head in Hawaii. Let's face it, if Brian continued doing instrumentals, he would be doing the best soundtrack in the movie industry right now. Brian had all
Mhm.
different kinds of styles. It didn't matter what it was. So I think it was Matt who was talking. I think it was Matt who was talking about instrumentals on the records. Was that? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the instrumentals on the records, and I love how
Mm-hmm.
Brian with Pet Sounds has kind of created this template with "Let's Go Away for a While" and Pet Sounds, the song.
Mhm.
And I think this record comes close, almost returns to that template. It's got the Passing By isn't quite an instrumental because it's got the wordless
Yeah.
stuff underneath, but it's close and it's really close to that Pet Sounds template. And I think that was on purpose. I think he came in here with, it's just a guess. I mean, but I do think he's returning to producing. He's had a clear vision of what he wants to do, and I think this record feels like it was his intention to have a couple of songs that didn't have lyrics on them, to use them as movement pieces of the movement.
And
And
they were doing that all the way back to the first album
yeah, but I don't think until Pet Sounds did they get to the point where he purposely picked up on the idea of
of
instrumental.
using them as segues. Yeah,
Yeah, as
for sure, for
purposeful
sure.
segues. Yeah, and that's where when I hear Pet Sounds, that's the first time where because he starts to do it on Summer Days, but I don't think that was that kind of that conceptual way of thinking didn't really materialize until he got the Pet Sounds and realized I don't need Bull Session with Big Daddy. I don't need a horrible throwaway jokey recording, and I don't need to do something silly with silly, or worry about lyrics here. I can because Brian, let's face it, Brian was great, brilliant at conveying a feeling and a mood
Mhm.
without ever having a lyric. It didn't
Mhm.
matter who the lyrical contributor was. You can listen to any of the stuff from Pet Sounds without lyrics, and
Mhm.
you feel the angst of the guy. So here, I just love this. This might very well be my favorite. If I had to choose a favorite song off the entire album, this might very well be my favorite. It reminds me a lot of Smile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Riley was also the one, David, that he likes the instrumentals on the records, but I'm a big fan of. I like the more ambient kind of instrumentals. I'm a big like Bowie's Berlin trilogy. Like I love Low. It's my favorite Bowie album. So like anything like that, I'm a sucker for.
Mhm.
Do you like this?
Oh, I love this. Yeah, I
Okay.
really like this a lot. Yeah, I do.
This is
I'm actually a little pleasantly surprised that Jake likes this so much. 'Cause I know that Jake struggles with some more like ambient style tracks.
It was a bit of a grower for me. This was one of the ones that didn't click on first listen, but like for me, it's just like it works because it like transports you when you listen to.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's also not too long. It does not stay its welcome for me. Like if this was like 7 minutes, I probably wouldn't go
and
back to it.
Yeah,
But
for
like,
sure.
yeah, I think
here
Yeah.
comes the night, right?
it's a perfect length, and like there's enough going on where like it interests me. Like I like at the end when it really picks up, like with the guitar and the ukulele, where it's like do 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 do. I really like that too. So really fun song to listen to.
But one of the things on this is you're talking about the ukulele, which I absolutely adore on this track, is
Yeah.
Lyle Ritz, who's
Oh.
really known for bass. And,
Mhm.
and it's, I look again, I did a little research on this, and Lyle Ritz was kind of known as the king of jazz uke, which
Hmm.
I had no idea because I always kind of pictured him as a stand-up bass or a bass player, right? I mean, just because he played that typically on Beach Boys recordings, especially a lot during the Smile sessions. But here he's playing the ukulele, and it's incredible because a ukulele is more or less a Hawaiian instrument. I love George Harrison's work too, and I love how much George incorporated
Yeah, me too.
Ukulele in his later work.
Yeah.
But here it's so I love like strings. The ukulele catches my attention when I
Yep.
hear it in a recording, and so I really like this recording on so many levels. It just even the drifting percussion, the kind of the loose drifting percussion in the background.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so ambient. It's one of the. It could be, and it is all those guys who were involved in the writing because it was like they were recording and let's go, and it's a really fantastic. Even I hope the Wrecking Crew has this in their archives in the vaults somewhere so they can kind of go and listen to it because it's that great. It's that great.
Yeah. All right. So the album closes with Transcendental Meditation. So I hadn't listened to the song in quite a while, but after re-listening to it recently for this episode, I have to say I think that this might just be one of the most ridiculous album closers of all time. The fact that the band decided to close out this really kind of peaceful and stripped back album with one of the most blaring and obnoxious tracks they ever recorded just really boggles my mind. Even judging it by itself, I wouldn't say it's really the greatest song. I don't find the melody to be that strong. I find the vocals to be a little bit annoying, which is something that I would rarely say with the Beach Boys, but I'm not a huge fan of the vocals on this song. And those horns that come in after each verse sound so obnoxious that I almost laugh when I hear them. I know it's like something, they're probably like dissonant or whatever, like it's probably some sort of experimentation, but it just doesn't really do anything for me. For me, it just sounds kind of ridiculous. But yeah, in the context of the album, this song especially sticks out like a sore thumb, and I really wish that the band had dropped this song or replaced it with pretty much any of the other tracks that they were working on around this time, because I really don't think they could have been more out of place on the album than this song. So not a big fan of this one, and I do agree. I think David mentioned this earlier, but that alternate version of this from the Wake the World compilation, I think would have fit the album much better than this. I wish that they had done something with that because, yeah, this song just feels really jarring, and it's definitely the weakest song of the album for me by a wide margin. So not a fan of this one at all.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think that the backing track has potential, albeit the horns are a little much.
Da-na-na-na.
But my whole thing with it is like and I might have said this before, but it almost sounds like a commercial. Like, here's this awesome thing, do it because it's going to change your life. And I don't really like that. It seems a little kind of like, let's shove it down your throat, which I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't think it works as a closer. I don't like the vibe the song kind of gives off. It just kind of almost feels like it was tacked on at the last minute. I think like you had said earlier, I think that if Diamond Head had been the closer, that would have been better. I've never been a huge fan of this one myself. I'm not even a big fan of TM song either from 15 Big Ones for much the same reason. Just this doesn't really do anything for me.
Well, okay, so hear me out, I guess. I I feel like it's almost a hallmark of a Brian Wilson production to have a shocking, jaw-dropping ending, whether it's the train noises in at the end of Pet Sounds or the random a cappella Mama Says at the end of Wild Honey. I think with Brian's unusual sense of humor, I think he probably just thought it was hilarious. And maybe to use like a modern lexicon, like I feel like he was kind of trolling people by just having these like sublime, beautiful albums and then just ending them with either raucous noise or just something you did not see coming. So I think in that way it's pretty fun. And the song has a great groove. I love like the swinging feel of the drums. And I do see where you guys are coming from, that it's like overly dissonant. But to me it's sort of fun as like a one-off Brian Wilson meets Las Vegas kind of vibe. So I'm glad it exists, even if it's not like one of my favorite tracks. Every now and then I want to listen to it and it scratches a certain itch. Or even I'll be practicing my drumming and I want to have like a swing beat to play to, and I'll want to play a swing kind of song, and I'll play along to that. So it's fun. It's weird, but one of the reasons I love the Beach Boys is all those moments that just make you chuckle or just make you. Same with Jane and Dean. Jane and Dean had a lot of those moments too, where you're like, this is so zany David, I know you'll know about this. That this song is kind of almost a fillet of soul kind of thing, where it's
Oh,
just very horn heavy, very blaring and silly. So I sort of see a parallel there.
Well, there's. This is interesting. So, um, when I asked Mike about this recording, I'll just read you what he says, and then I'll give you my two different opinions of this recording.
mhm.
I asked him. I said, the song "Transcendental Meditation" is jarring in comparison to the other songs on the album. Mike said it is pretty. It is pretty dynamic, just the way the song came together. In a way, meditation is pretty peaceful practice. But it's also a preparation for activity, and sometimes your activity is very dynamic. Transcendental meditation is the counterbalance to all the serene and peaceful thought recordings. There is a dynamic aspect to that Maharishi called the outer stroke of activity. There's the inner stroke of transcending, which is during your meditation, and then the outer stroke of activity when you're done and you go out into the world. I'm adding that. I think transcendental meditation is an outer stroke type of song. It's more dynamic and powerful in that way. So it's nice to hear Mike
Hmm.
say that because it gave me a perspective that I didn't have of it. I didn't think of it as a TM commercial. I think, and if I had, it would have really prevented me from from taking up the practice. Um, um, I don't really care. So when I first heard the Friends album, I didn't care for it. I do, and I agree with Matt and Jake that I would have liked the earlier version of it, which was originally called Spanish Guitar, I think, and it would have been interesting to see if they could have kept. Now, to me, but I also agree with Nate. There's, I think, 100% knowing what Marilyn said in my interview about this record, Brian's sense of humor, and his probably what I would consider his frustration with TM not doing really what he had hoped it would. I think all those things played a part in this recording. I think on one hand it's a joke, like a Brian in like tongue in cheek joke. I think when Mike he wrote the song, Brian's I think the intention was there to write exactly what we got. But I think it's Brian who was in, full control of the type of instrumentation that went into this. I don't see Mike saying, let's make this a loud, raucous recording at all. I don't, if those conversations took place, have no idea. But I don't see Mike having any input there. Because again, I think this was a record that Brian had full arrangement, songwriting control of in terms of the cycle from beginning to
Mhm.
end. I think Brian had the full vision, and I think because this song did come later, once Mike came back, and I'm sure Mike was all about telling all the guys about his experience with the Beatles and Maharishi and everything, and I'm sure that was a major topic of conversation because I mean they tried to tour with it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
um, but I really don't. When I listen to this song, I don't listen to it as a sincere attempt at communicating the rest what the rest of this record is like. It is a stark contrast to everything else we listened to up until this point. I do like that Diamond Head precedes it because Diamond Head kind of opens up and flourishes in all these little nuanced instrumental ways that it's not just the serene, different songs that we're getting up until that point. So I do like that Diamond Head precedes this. Uh, I don't hate it, but it's just I like it more than I would Bull Session from Big Daddy as an album. So I do feel that it works more than an album filler. I understand and hear its intention. Once I had that answer from Mike about the outer activity, I thought, okay, this helps me appreciate it in that way. But it's to me, it's the weakest song on the album.
Yeah, I agree. Like, if it like your what you said about it, how it might have been intended as like a joke in a way, like Brian almost like kind of like almost like joking about transcendental meditation, like, oh, you're expecting this really peaceful song, and then it's just like absolutely just blaring and like loud and obnoxious. Like,
Honest to God, I honest to God can see Brian and Mike having wrote it And because Mike's just talking, hyping up this whole experience that he had, like
Yeah.
as soon as he left the studio, I can see Brian going, okay, and then just doing this loud in your face, like, because Mike was probably in everybody's face about this great experience. You guys should have gone with me. I got to hang out with the Beatles, and you missed out. We gotta get Maharishi on tour. So I could absolutely see, from cousin to cousin. Oh, I'm gonna get him.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a little fun here and do this in such a way that he's just not expecting.
Yeah.
And I could absolutely see that going down that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking of it like in that perspective, I kind of can appreciate it a little bit more. But at the same time, like I can imagine like someone like listening to this at the time and like not having that context or knowing like Brian's personality and like hearing this at the end of the album, I'd just be like, "What the hell is this?" And that's still how I do it. And also, I've heard some quotes from, I believe there's a quote from Dennis. It might be in the Beach Boys book that recently came out, where he says something along the lines of like, "Yeah, like we wanted to do something different, like people would expect we're going to do a really peaceful meditation song if it's about meditation, but then we decided to make it really like really loud, which like makes me think like they really thought they were doing something here. And it's like I just don't I just don't think it fits on the album as well. I'm kind of like what you said, Nate. Like I'm glad that it exists. Like it's cool to hear it. Like it's definitely something kind of quirky and different, like with like the dissonant horns and everything. But like when you compare this to everything else on the album, like it just does not fit in whatsoever. And the fact that this is the note that the album leaves you on, like it's almost like you're throwing away all the rest of the album because like this is the last thing you're going to leave listeners with to remember. Like, wow, like what was that? So I don't know.
So in a nutshell, the recency bias of this song is going to color your whole perception of the record.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Like it almost makes you
Yeah.
like this beautiful atmosphere, really peaceful and serene, and then it's like da na 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 da. Like I don't know. It's just I don't know. Not a big fan of it, but honestly, David, that's an interesting perspective. I'm definitely going to think of that next time I listen to this song. So, all right. So now I want to get into some of the outtakes, extra material from the Friends session. So. The band recorded quite a bit of material around this time that they were working on. Like David mentioned, you can hear a lot of it on the Wake the World compilation. I'm not going to mention everything that was recorded, obviously, that would be here all night, but I do want to mention a few tracks that stood out to me. So first off, the alternate version of Wake the World. This one has a bit of a different arrangement because it has like more prominent strings on it. I actually like this version a lot, and I feel like it's almost more commercial. Like if the band were to attempt to release this song as a single, I feel like this could have possibly worked. I don't know how well it would have charted, but definitely sounds a bit more commercial to me. I like it just about as much as the version that made the album. As we mentioned, the alternate version of Transcendental Meditation definitely kind of fits the title of the song more. It has a more kind of serene sound to it, especially like those vocals during like the little, I guess the chorus part, like the ooh, it's very pretty. So I think that would have been a much more fitting song to include on Friends. The track Be Here in the Morning, Darling. This is another kind of bossa nova sounding recording. To me, it almost sounds like a blend of Be Here in the Morning and Busy Doing Nothing. But yeah, I really like this one a lot. I like the horns on it. I don't know if it's necessarily done or it's like near finished, but I think it is a cool track. The song Our New Home or Our Happy Home is a nice little bouncy track. This one would eventually be reworked into Our Sweet Love on the Sunflower album. I already mentioned the alternate version of Be Still, where it actually features piano, which I do actually kind of like more than the version on Friends.
And a little bit of drums, right?
And some drums as well. Yep.
Yeah.
And then the last track I wanted to shout out, Rock and Roll Woman, which is a Buffalo Springfield cover, who they actually were touring with around this time, I believe. So the version on Wake the World is just a backing track. Like it's not complete. But if you go on YouTube, there's a couple of clips of the band performing this live with Carl on lead. And I think that they sound really great. I think that the song fits Carl's vocal really well. And I can see why the band covered it. So those are just some of the tracks on the Wake the World sessions, but there's quite a few more. Do you guys want to shout out any tracks in particular that stood out to you or that you thought were memorable?
I know that there's the extended Meant for You, and then there's also that version of Passing By that kind of has lyrics on it. So that's an interesting experiment to listen to. I'm not sure I like it better than the version that ended up on Friends, but it is interesting just to hear like kind of what they were going for if they were going to add lyrics to it. And I know that there's that early version of All I Want to Do that's not on Wake the World, but I know you had mentioned it.
Yeah,
Jake,
it has like a sitar arrangement on it, which I think it's kind of cool, but like I think the Sunflower version is just like incredible. Like it's like timeless. We're like the this early version of All I Want to Do, like it's cool, but it definitely sounds more of its time for sure. So
But yeah, this is what I want to shout out.
yeah. Nate, any songs you wanted to mention?
Yeah, this collection specifically, the Even Steven version of Be Here in the Morning
Busy doing
has
nothing.
a great. Oh, yeah, my bad, my bad. Of Busy Doing
Okay.
Nothing is great. And like you mentioned, Be Here in the Morning, Darling is very nice, very kind of Burt Bacharach vibe on that one.
Yeah, definitely.
And while it's actually from a few years earlier, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that spectacular version of Child is the Father of the Man that they tacked on to the very end of this release. Because man, that just knocked my socks off the first time I heard it. And it had a lot of bits of music or sound effects that didn't make it onto the 2011 version of the song that we got. And I know there's a whole crazy story that is attached to that of the fact that Mark recorded it on his cell phone, I believe, or something like that when a collector was playing him the tapes. But nonetheless, that's like a great little bonus, little nugget of music that dates back to the Smile session.
I'm going to just narrow it to two. And this is just kind of music that was happening around the time that I just think just We're Together Again, which started in late May, and Old Man River.
Oh yeah.
I love that one, Old Man River.
Brian really dug his heels. He worked on that quite a bit. Like he had the previous year, he worked quite a bit on Can't Wait Too Long, and then that kind of sat there. He did the same with Old Man River and Old Folks at Home, and he was really, again, Old Folks at Home, Old Man River, Be Here in the Morning, I Went to Sleep. I'm telling you, these songs, My Little Red Book, You're as Cool as You Can Be, Our Happy Home, this was something else he was working on. But again, like the Smile material, he did not have a clear vision of it, and it sat incomplete. He didn't have a clear vision of what he had wanted to do. But I can tell you right now, I think it wouldn't have been psychedelic, but if they had released in '68, I don't know when, but because we were talking about a hypothetical, but man, Can't Wait Too Long with the B-side being something like Old Man River would have just knocked my socks off. I mean, it would have been incredible because of how much time, you can hear the production in that stuff. And I love on the two box sets, there's the Good Vibrations box set from '93, but then the Made in California one that came out in 2013. I think they both have the Old Man River stuff on it, and it's just gorgeous. It's strings. We're talking about strings again. Where, you can hear, and Can't Wait Too Long. They have like all the Can't Wait Too Long stuff kind of crunched together in like a 7-minute thing, and it's just fascinating to hear that stuff. So those are the two things that stand out in my mind. And you know what? And we're talking about like Transcendental Meditation not being the last track for if they'd waited 1 month, Do It Again could have been a closing track, or they could have ended the album in Diamond Head, and Do It Again could have been the lead track for side 2. I mean they came this close, right? I mean, is that again? It's another one of those weird. They have so many moments in their history where things happen that way.
Right.
And it's just another one.
All right, so to wrap up our discussion, I just wanted to briefly touch on some of the album's commercial and critical reception that it received both at the time and in recent years. So Matt, do you want some reviews of the album from the time?
Sure. So it did receive some positive reviews, but Keith Babin says that they were published too late to influence sales. A Mojo retrospective says the band's remaining fan base reacted to the album with the abandonment of any hope that Brian Wilson would deliver a true successor to his 1966 masterwork Pet Sounds. John Stebbins says that the quirky gentleness in the context of political protests, race riots, and the war-torn social landscape of 1968 made it about as square a peg as one can imagine. And Richie Unterberger said the group lost most of their audience by being less experimental with their music. A Billboard reviewer predicted that the group should score high on the charts with the album and highlighted Annalie the Healer and Transcendental Meditation as catchy numbers.
That's one way to put it.
That's one way to put it.
Mike Love fan.
Rolling Stone's Arthur Schmidt wrote in his review of the album, everything on the first side is great. Listen once and you might think this album is nowhere, but it's really just at a very special place, and after a half dozen listens, you can be there.
Matt, I wanted to jump in here as I wanted to mention some of the retrospective ones as well. First
Yes.
off, from Record Mirror, David Griffiths. I had to mention this because I thought it was hilarious. David Griffiths referred to Transcendental Meditation as the most disappointing Beach Boys track of the year, which I thought was funny. That's probably kind of my reaction to it as well. But yeah, in terms of some retrospective notes, David Leaf said that Friends has since been reevaluated as one of the Beach Boys' finest artistic efforts. AllMusic's Donald Garisco described the album as a cult favorite among hardcore fans and highlighted the title track as mellow, lovely, and a good example of the Beach Boys' late 60s output. He said that it's far less musically complex than California Girls or Wouldn't It Be Nice, but it possesses a homespun charm of its own. A writer from Mojo said that given distance and hindsight, Friends is a uniquely rewarding Beach Boys album that, accepting Pet Sounds, is the group's most sonically and thematically unified. Another person said that the album was lovely and one of the group's warmest and most spiritual records. And another reviewer called it one of the most underrated Beach Boys albums, prettier and less quirky than Smiley Smile and Wild Honey. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, one of Riley's favorite artists, Paul Weller, from the Style Council and from the Jam, named this album as one of his favorite albums of all time, which I think says a lot. It kind of shows that other musicians were listening to this stuff and really respect it. This album was also voted at number 662 in one of those all-time top 1,000 album lists. I believe it was in the book. So that's pretty cool as well. So, yeah, overall, I think that this album is one of those albums that, like a lot of their later material, people have really come around on, especially over the past few decades. When it came out, I think it really baffled a lot of people, both the band's fans and critics. But nowadays, I think people really look at this period of the band as being very influential, both on indie music and just like kind of that lo-fi style, which the band really kind of pioneered here. So I think for that reason, these albums are really looked back on fondly nowadays. So
Yep. And then also I want to touch on one last thing. Commercial 126 in the US, the worst that it ever had done. And I think Capitol was very disappointed with that, how badly it did. UK, much better, number 13. But yeah, 126 didn't even chart in the top half of the charts.
And I think Capitol kind of panicked too, because I think they immediately after this kind of bombed, they released the Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3. And then I think that bombed too and did even worse in this album somehow. And I think they were like, oh God, what are we going to do?
And then 2 weeks after that, they put out probably one of the most questionable releases ever put out for an artist of this stature, Stack of Tracks. What the hell was that? Seriously.
Backing tracks.
The first karaoke album of its
So
time.
I know what it is, but I mean, like, rhetorically speaking, what the hell is that? It's like a half-ass, like, okay, let's try to make something.
I think even Brian at the time kind of knew like that wasn't probably going to sell, because in that interview I mentioned from like 1968, he says to the guy, he's like, yeah, we have this album coming out called Stack of Tracks. It's like all like the instrumental backing tracks. And he's like, I don't know how well it will sell, but like I think it's pretty cool. That's pretty much what he said. So.
I think the only reason that album is sought after today is because if you can find an original copy with the liner notes, it has the tabs, like the guitar tabs to do the fingers. Other than that, it's worthless.
Well, hey, I'll say just listening that album, as someone that was and will for the rest of my life be trying to learn and improve as a producer, that album is really invaluable to me, to hear all those details that you don't always get to hear when the voices are there too.
Oh, I mean, for like musicians, producers, anyone like that's interested in the music, like I think that's like an amazing thing to have, especially at the time.
Yeah.
But you didn't have that and stuff where like, but like to like the regular listener back then, they probably been like, what the hell?
For sure.
I've never actually listened to it, but like, are the vocals removed cleanly? Because I've always heard like you can still kind of hear them if you listen closely.
Depends on the song, because there's a little bleed in some of them, and some of them.
Yeah. I mean,
it's kind of Stack of Tracks is kind of a tutorial record for people who want to pick up the guitar and learn. I mean, that's how it struck me.
Mm-hmm.
If you were somebody young and you were a Beach Boys fan, that's what that record serves. That's the purpose that record serves, because it came with the music inside and everything. And if you were trying to learn to play guitar, learn to play Beach Boys songs, just from a rudimentary standpoint, that's the purpose it served. I mean, there's the collector's aspect, which is a whole nother ball of wax. But that's in terms of what purpose the record served. I mean, I'd imagine that's probably the closest they got. The fans who started, maybe the young teenagers who were, like their All Summer Long records and stuff like that, and weren't quite in college yet, and weren't, experimenting with different things that, they heard Smiley Smile and they thought, okay, we like Good Vibrations and we like Heroes and Villains, and the rest of this is weird. And then they get Wild Honey, and it's like, well, we like Wild Honey, we like Darling, and some of these songs, this is not what we're used to, but it's okay. And then they get Friends, and it's this very serene, settling, and then they get to the end of the album, and it's just this like in your face thing, and then that's followed with Do It Again. And then so anybody following the group who's into the All Summer Long or the Summer Days or the Good Vibrations even, for Do It Again to come along, that was the, and it's such a simple song. I mean, it goes back production level wise. It goes all the way back to before All Summer. It gets the around the time of Shutdown Volume 2.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the amount of effort and that they put into it. So I never really have I don't have a tendency to discuss about what I don't like about something. It's not in my tendency. It's not a half glass full thing. It's just I just don't tend to think about, if I don't like something or I don't care about something, I just don't tend to think about it. So usually when I express an opinion about something, it's what I enjoy about whatever it is. Even if if I don't enjoy a lot about it, then I won't have much to say. But it's just not my tendency to think about what I don't enjoy.
So before we wrap up, do you guys have any final thoughts about the Friends album or anything that you wanted to mention that you didn't get the chance to mention earlier in the episode?
I feel like this was really a lovely discussion. And like I said when we started, this has for many years been one of my favorite albums. But now, after having this discussion, I have a lot more appreciation for it, which I didn't even foresee happening. I thought that I already loved it as much as I could, but I love it that much more now.
I really like this record. I said before, it's probably in the top 5 for me. Just a really enjoyable record. Short, but not in a way that leaves you wanting more. It doesn't feel like, unfinished or half baked. Got a nice vibe, ambience to it. Takes you to, like, I think the Rolling Stone review said it best, where like it takes you to a place listening to it. Just a really lovely, lovely record. And it's a bit of a shame it didn't do well in the charts at the time, but it did find an audience, like much of their later material. It didn't, and I think that a lot of people, when they kind of, I saw this comment one time on your favorite place, Podheads, that said, like, I feel like a lot of alternative indie rock is just finding an old Beach Boys song and redoing it. And it's true. It's like you could just see how how their influence permeates.
David, anything else you wanted to mention?
I just think that this is this album. I met a guy when I started doing TM. He came. His name is Adam. Adam came, and I think he started learning after I did, because I was auditing classes. I was going and doing group meditations with classes of people who were just learning, because I couldn't get enough of the idea of sitting down with a group of people and meditating. And then the experience of just sitting in a room with 20 some odd people who just meditated for time. It's a beautiful experience. And so I met this guy. I had just done the Friends issue, which I had here. And I actually brought this in. I had just finished it. I brought it in because I wanted to give a copy to my teacher, because I was telling her about All This Is That. I was telling her, she knows who the Beach Boys are, like most people do. But she was probably late 20s, early 30s by this time in late 2018, because she was just about to have a baby. And I brought this in. I made a CD for her of just like spiritual songs by the Beach Boys, not just the Friends album. It was like the whole Friends album plus All This Is That, some other things. And she just had no idea about this part of their catalog.
Yeah.
And she was just amazed by it, and it was interesting. So I'm in there one day. I have got this magazine, and I'm talking about their music and this group of people. And here's Adam sitting over there, and he said, "The Beach Boys are the reason I'm here." And I said, "Oh, you're a Beach Boy fan?" And he said, "No, I heard the Friends album."
Wow.
So just the Friends album inspired him enough to be interested enough to look into meditating.
Wow.
That's basically the reason I did too, more or less.
All right, so we will wrap it up there. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this 45th episode of Good Timin. I hope you all enjoyed the show. I had a great time discussing the Friends album with you guys, and I'm looking forward to wrapping up our late 60s album discussion series next week with 2020. which will also be our final episode of the season. So as always, if you like this podcast and want to hear more, feel free to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. We greatly appreciate the support as it motivates us to make more episodes in the future. Also, be sure to check out Endless Summer Quarterly if you haven't already. If you're a big Beach Boys fan like us, you're going to really love it. And I know David would really appreciate you subscribing or purchasing an issue. So lastly, as a reminder, the Good Timin podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So there's plenty of different places to listen and keep up with the show. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.